A single shard of night lay suspended in a cradle of gold. That is how the old chroniclers described it. A mirror not made by hands but summoned from the earth's deepest wounds, polished until darkness itself became a surface. In the flickering torchlight of a temple chamber, the obsidian mirror did not shine. It absorbed, it devoured, and anyone who stepped too close swore they could feel it breathing. Imagine the chamber quiet except for the crackle of pine resin torches. High above, the stone ceiling disappears into shadow. Priests in jaguar cloaks stand in a semicircle, each holding their breath as another figure slowly approaches the mirror. His footsteps echo against the carved walls. His pulse, if he allowed himself to acknowledge it, beats as loudly as the drums outside. Because tonight is no ordinary night. Tonight, a question will be asked, and the mirror will decide whether to answer. The man steps forward until the surface is only inches from his face. He expects to see his reflection, distorted or trembling in the uneven light. Instead, he sees nothing at all. Blackness, infinite and silent. It feels like gazing into the mouth of a cave that has never known daylight. He has been trained his entire life for this moment, yet he cannot suppress the instinctive shudder at the realization that he is looking at something that is not a mirror but a threshold. Outside the temple, the city pulses with life. Tenochtitlan, jewel of the lake, capital of an empire that believes itself eternal. Drums pound a steady rhythm that rises from the ceremonial plaza like a heartbeat. Every sound, every torch, every tremor feels synchronized with the ritual unfolding in the chamber. Though the people outside do not know the purpose of the gathering, they sense its gravity. They whisper rumors of omens, of shadows in water, of priests who speak in riddles. They whisper about the mirror. Inside, the man's fingertips tremble as he reaches out, but the high priest softly murmurs for him to stop. Touching the mirror is forbidden. Touch is invitation. An invitation can never be withdrawn. Another torch flares. The man feels the warmth on his cheek and notices the way the mirror swallows the light whole, returning no glow, no shimmer, no glint of gold. It is as if the object refuses the world, refusing even to acknowledge the existence of the one who stands before it. And in this refusal lies its power. For what is feared more than the unknown? The high priest begins to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, each syllable echoing off the stone walls. The other priests join in. Their chants coil around the chamber like invisible smoke, filling the air with a tension that makes every breath feel heavy. They tell the story of how the mirror was carved from the mountain of knives, shaped by hands that claimed to hear voices from beneath the rock. They describe how the mirror was polished using water gathered from a lake where no birds ever landed, and how, upon its completion, every artisan who worked on it refused to look directly into it ever again. The man standing before it knows these stories well, but tonight they feel different. Older, truer. The chants grow louder, then abruptly stop. Silence floods the chamber. Every priest raises a torch high, illuminating the mirror from all angles. It remains black, absolute, unmoving. Look, the high priest whispers. The man inhales sharply and fixes his gaze on the mirror. First, nothing happens. Then, slowly, something stirs within the darkness. A ripple, a flicker, a shape. His mind rejects it, insisting it must be a trick of the light. But the movement continues, gathering itself like a storm cloud twisting into form. His heartbeat quickens. He leans closer. The surface warps, not outward, not like a reflection, but inward, as though the mirror is folding space into itself. His breath catches. Is he dreaming? The priests hold steady, their eyes locked not on the mirror but on him. They want to know what he sees, because each person sees something different, something personal, something dangerous. A whisper escapes the mirror. Not a sound, not a voice, more like a suggestion forming inside the mind. A thought that is not entirely his own. He tries to step back, but his feet refuse to move. Instead, he finds himself leaning even closer, drawn into the point where reality seems to thin. And then it comes. A flash, metal glinting under a sun that feels unnatural. Figures emerging from mist. shapes that resemble men but carry objects that thunder like storms. He sees fire where water should be, a great bird of wood crossing the horizon, and faces, foreign faces, etched with hunger and ambition. He gasps and stumbles backward. The vision vanishes the moment he breaks eye contact. The mirror returns to its unbroken stillness, absorbing the firelight as though nothing had happened. The priests watch him carefully. They do not ask what he saw. They know better than to request details. But the tremor in his hands tells them enough. The mirror has spoken, and once it speaks, the consequences echo far beyond the chamber walls. Outside, fireworks burst over the city as part of the evening festival. Children laugh. Merchants shout. Canoes drift lazily across the lake, carrying flowers and offerings. Life continues in its vibrant rhythm, unaware that in a silent room above the water, a vision has been seen. A vision that will be interpreted, debated, feared, and ultimately acted upon. The man wipes sweat from his brow. He tries to steady his breathing, but the image will not leave him. It lingers like smoke, like prophecy. He turns once more to the mirror. To anyone else, it would appear as nothing more than a polished disk of volcanic stone. But he knows that what he witnessed was not imagination or hallucination. Something had looked back at him from the depths of the Obsidian. Something not bound by the laws of his world. The high priest places a hand on his shoulder. Once you see, he murmurs, you cannot unsee. The man lowers his gaze, unable to meet the black surface again. Outside, the drums continue, a heartbeat echoing through the city. But now, for the first time, he hears something beneath them. A warning, a question, a destiny unfolding. And as he leaves the chamber, stepping out into the warm night air, he cannot shake the feeling that the mirror has not finished showing him everything. That this first vision is only the beginning, and that whatever waits beyond the horizon of that obsidian darkness has already begun moving toward the empire. The story of Obsidian begins long before temples rose from the valley floor, long before kings and priests argued over visions. It begins in the Earth's violent heart, where pressure and heat mix in ways both destructive and strangely creative. Imagine a mountain trembling. Deep inside, magma churns and folds over itself like boiling ink. When it finally erupts, it does not simply spill molten rock. It releases something that has been forming for thousands of years. A glass born from fire. Obsidian emerges from volcanic eruption the way lightning strikes. Sudden, bright, and transformative. But once the lava cools, the result is something almost unnatural. A stone that is not quite stone. A mirror that is not quite mirror. Harder than steel, sharper than teeth, yet gleaming with a glossy darkness that seems to hold movement even when it lies still in your palm. Ancient peoples called it the stone that remembers night. And for good reason. Hold a piece of obsidian under the sun, and it gives nothing back. It invites the light inside, swallows it whole, and offers only shadow in return. To the first humans who found it scattered along volcanic slopes, obsidian must have seemed impossible. Here was a stone that could be shaped into blades finer than anything carved from bone. A stone that split cleanly, like a secret revealing itself without resistance. They learned quickly that obsidian could slice through flesh, wood, hide, anything it touched without losing its edge. It became the first scalpel, the earliest weapon of precision. Armies were shaped by it, and so were rituals. The stone saw blood long before it saw reflection. But something else stirred in its depths. Those who worked with obsidian noticed its strange behavior. It seemed to change color under certain skies, sometimes deep black, sometimes smoky gray, sometimes shimmering faintly with hidden hues. Artisans claimed they once saw the stone blink when polished at night. Superstition? Perhaps. But obsidian has always lived in the space between explanation and mythology, balancing itself on a razor's edge. Imagine a small village near a volcanic field thousands of years ago. Children playing among shards scattered like stars across the ground. Elders sitting by fires, telling stories of how the mountain spat out pieces of the sky itself. Hunters using obsidian-tipped arrows that could drop a deer in a single strike. farmers using obsidian scrapers to harvest crops with quiet efficiency. It was a gift, one that elevated whole civilizations. Yet, for the more spiritual among them, obsidian represented something deeper. When polished long enough, its surface became a window. Not a window that shows the world behind you, but one that challenges you to confront yourself. To the untrained eye, it reflected little. But to those who stared long enough, it began to reveal shapes, thoughts, memories, possibilities. When obsidian was heated and shaped into small discs, ancient priests discovered something unsettling. The stone did not behave like normal rock. It responded to pressure differently, almost resisting certain cuts, guiding the hand of the artisan. As if the material itself had preferences, what form it wished to take. Some mirrors cracked without warning during carving, while others seemed to bend willingly to the craftsman's intention. It was unpredictable, alive in its own quiet way. Travelers carried obsidian across regions, its sharpness prized but its mystery even more so. When trade routes expanded, obsidian moved like a black river through the ancient world. From one valley to another, from lakes to mountains, from the hands of simple workers to the halls of priests. It became currency, weapon, tool, and symbol all at once. But in central Mexico, obsidian transformed into something greater. Here, the stone's spiritual power grew. Volcanic ranges supplied endless quantities, and artisans perfected techniques that bordered on sacred ritual. To carve obsidian required patience, breath control, and absolute silence. The material punished haste, punished pride. One misplaced strike and the entire piece shattered. Not into a single crack, but into 1,000 glittering fragments that scattered like broken stars across the workshop floor. The people believed the stone had a soul, and souls were to be respected. As the great city of Teotihuacan rose, obsidian became its bloodline. Warriors carried macuahuitl blades embedded with obsidian teeth capable of cutting through bone. Merchants filled entire caravans with polished obsidian to trade with distant tribes. But it was the priests who saw something more. A stone that connected earth and sky. A material born in fire yet cool to the touch. Something paradoxical, mysterious, beyond the simple world of tools and weapons. The more they studied it, the more they believed obsidian was not just a stone, but a link, a border between the known world and the unseen. A border that could be crossed, but only by those prepared for what lay on the other side. Some legends describe obsidian as the skin of the underworld. Others say the gods used obsidian shards to carve mankind's fate into the stars. One tale speaks of how Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and sorcery, tore out his own foot and replaced it with a mirror of obsidian that allowed him to see everything that had been, everything that was, and everything that could be. To ordinary people, obsidian was practical. To warriors, essential. To artisans, a challenge. But to priests, it was a message. A reminder that the world they walked upon was alive, and that some stones, very few, held more than weight. They held meaning. Over generations, artisans learned to polish obsidian into perfect circles, smooth enough to reflect stars. They noticed that when placed before firelight, the mirrors drew shadows inward instead of casting them outward. They noticed how vibrations traveled differently through obsidian, how even a whisper seemed to pulse through its mass. It was as if obsidian listened. It was as if obsidian remembered. And so, when the time came for empires to rise, obsidian became more than a resource. It became a foundation, a symbol, a tool through which rulers claimed divine insight. For when a king looked into a polished obsidian mirror, he was not merely seeing his face. He was seeing his destiny, or what he believed was destiny. And belief, in the ancient world, could shape the fate of millions. Long before the Aztecs built their island capital, long before empires rose and fell, there stood another city, older, grander, and eerier than anything that came after it. A place the later Mexica would call Teotihuacan, the city where gods were born. Even today, walking through its ruins feels like stepping into a memory not meant for human eyes. Wide ceremonial avenues stretch so perfectly straight that they seem designed not for people, but for celestial beings. Pyramids loom like frozen mountains, their surfaces once gleaming with plaster so bright it reflected the sun like polished bone. But beneath the sunlight, there was another layer to the city. One hidden, one secret, one built of shadows and reflections. Teotihuacan was obsessed with mirrors. Visitors to the ancient city would have noticed this immediately. Mirrors woven into headdresses, mirrors embedded in shields, mirrors set into the masks worn by priests and dancers, mirrors buried in tombs, mirrors placed upon altar stones where offerings burned. Everywhere obsidian, shining, absorbing, whispering. It wasn't decoration. It was doctrine. Imagine standing in the heart of Teotihuacan at dusk, when the last red light slips behind the mountains. The city breathes differently then. The pyramids cast long shadows across the avenue of the dead. Torches flicker to life, their flames mirrored in polished obsidian discs held by priests walking the ceremonial road. The air fills with incense. Drums echo through the stone corridors. The people believed mirrors were more than tools, they were portals. They reflected not the world, but the truth beneath it. Through mirrors, priests claimed they could communicate with gods. Through mirrors, rulers claimed legitimacy. Through mirrors, decisions that shaped entire generations were made. It is no coincidence that the most sacred deity associated with Teotihuacan was one whose symbol was a black mirror. The priests said his presence lived inside these reflective stones. They said he watched through them, choosing whom to bless and whom to punish. Yet the mirror cult did not originate at the surface. Its roots were buried deep underground. Beneath the Great Pyramids lay a labyrinth of hidden chambers and tunnels. These were not places of burial or storage, they were ritual spaces. Some of the most astonishing discoveries made in modern excavations reveal that ancient engineers carefully crafted rooms with mica-covered walls, floors dusted with iron pyrite, and ceilings designed to trap light. These materials shimmer like stars when exposed to firelight. Now imagine mirrors placed inside such rooms. Imagine what the priests saw. Liquid mercury pools have been found in these underground chambers, shimmering like black water. When torches burned above them, their surfaces rippled with distorted reflections, turning every flicker into a haunting, dancing vision. It is easy to see how someone could mistake this for supernatural communication. Teotihuacan was the first great capital to discover that mirrors could control a person's perception, that reflections could be weaponized, that mystery could be engineered. And so the city grew not only in stone but in belief. Every generation built more mirrors, larger mirrors, darker mirrors. Obsidian workshops lined the edges of the city, each one humming with quiet activity. The artisans who shaped these stones worked with an intensity bordering on spiritual devotion. They believed they were crafting eyes for the gods. Each mirror was a vessel, a doorway, a warning. The people saw them everywhere. Entering a temple meant passing mirrors that stared back silently. Visiting a priest meant kneeling before a disk of obsidian before speaking. Even marriage ceremonies included mirrors facing the bride and groom, watching them promise their lives. In Teotihuacan, mirrors were witnesses. But there was one place where mirrors held the most power. The upper chambers of the Pyramid of the Sun legends speak of a hall lined entirely with polished obsidian, arranged so that a single torch could create 100 reflections, each one slightly different. Priests called it the Chamber of Echoes. They believed that if you stood in the center, the mirror that reflected you most clearly was the path your soul was destined to follow. Some claimed the chamber showed futures. Others insisted it showed fears. Every priest agreed on one thing. No one left that hall unchanged. People who visited Teotihuacan from distant regions often described the city as unsettling, as if it were too orderly, too perfect, too intentional. Some early chroniclers suggested that the city's design mimicked the cosmos. Others went further, theorizing that Teotihuacan was built as a giant ritual instrument meant to channel energy through sight, sound, and reflection. The alignment of streets, the positioning of pyramids, the presence of mirrors, all seemed engineered toward one purpose: to create a living dialogue with the divine. But the most mysterious part of the city's legacy is not its architecture. It is the silence that followed. One day, without warning, Teotihuacan began to empty. Temples were abandoned. Workshops fell silent. Entire neighborhoods crumbled. The mirror chambers went dark. No one knows why. No documents survived to explain the collapse. But the mirrors remained, buried beneath ash and soil, waiting. Centuries later, when the Aztecs discovered the ruins, they were awestruck. They believed they had stumbled upon the birthplace of creation itself. They saw the obsidian fragments scattered everywhere and understood immediately. This place had once been a city of visions, and visions were power, so they claimed Teotihuacan's legacy as their own. They adopted its gods, its symbols, its rituals. Most importantly, they inherited its mirrors. What began as Teotihuacan's spiritual technology became the backbone of Aztec prophecy. And at the center of this transformation was a single object, an obsidian mirror said to be older, darker, and far more dangerous than any other. A mirror carved in Teotihuacan's shadow. A mirror that would eventually find its way into the hands of an emperor, and through him into the fate of an empire. Before the first kings of the valley carved their thrones from stone, before the great cities dreamed themselves into being, there was already a presence woven into the shadows of the land. The people spoke of him in hushed tones, not out of fear alone, but out of reverence. He was not a god to be approached lightly. He was not a god who waited patiently for worship. He was a god who watched. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. To understand the obsidian mirror is to understand him, because the mirror was not merely his symbol, it was his identity, his weapon, his eye. Every reflection, every flicker of shadow, every shimmer of black glass belonged to him. And through these unblinking surfaces, he moved through the world like a thought that could not be contained. Imagine him not as a figure carved into temple walls, but as an idea, a force, a presence that hung in the air whenever the night grew too quiet, whenever the wind stirred unexpectedly, whenever someone felt the sensation of being watched when they were entirely alone. Tezcatlipoca was the embodiment of the unknown, the unpredictable, the ever-shifting boundary of fate. The people believed he could create a world with one hand and destroy it with the other, all without changing expression. In the old myths, he walks with a stride that shakes the sky. One foot is human, powerful, and sure. The other is not a foot at all, only a swirling obsidian mirror. It is said that the mirror foot glows as if lit by an invisible fire, trailing smoke wherever he steps. With each movement, visions ripple across its surface. Battles yet to be fought, cities yet to fall, emperors not yet born. It is said that if Tezcatlipoca ever stood still, the future would freeze with him. But he does not stand still. In creation stories, he and the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl shape the world together. First as allies, then as rivals, then as something in between. Their relationship is a dance of balance and rupture. Where Quetzalcoatl brings wisdom, Tezcatlipoca brings challenge. Where Quetzalcoatl offers order, Tezcatlipoca brings the chaos necessary for change. To ancient thinkers, creation without destruction was impossible. Life without struggle was meaningless. This is the paradox that made Tezcatlipoca so feared and revered. He offered not comfort, but clarity. Not peace, but purpose. To invoke him was to invite revelation, but also danger. Because the truth he showed was not always the truth one wished to see. The obsidian mirror he carried was more than an object. It was a doorway to possibility. And possibility, unlike prophecy, is wild. It shifts. It hides. It misleads. The priests who served him understood this well, and they crafted rituals to guide people through the mirror's visions. Some emerged stronger, their paths sharpened like obsidian blades. Others left shaking, unable to confront the things the mirror had shown them, the things they had shown themselves. A story often told in temple courtyards speaks of a young warrior who sought a vision of his glorious future. He knelt before the mirror, proud and confident, expecting to see himself standing atop a pyramid, a crown upon his brow. Instead, he saw a small room, a narrow cell, a single window barred with iron, and his own hands, calloused and trembling, gripping the edge of a bed in despair. He tried to look away, but the mirror held him. The vision deepened until he saw the cause of his downfall, his own arrogance, his own hunger for power. his own betrayal of a friend in battle. When he pulled back at last, gasping for air, Tezcatlipoca's priest said only one thing: "The mirror shows the path you are already walking." That was his cruelty and his wisdom. Tezcatlipoca did not push people toward destruction. He merely revealed the consequences of their choices. Those who could change did. Those who could not fell. In the ancient cities, festivals were held in his honor. But these were not joyous celebrations. They were reminders. During one ritual, a young man, chosen for his beauty, his talent, his promise, would be adorned with flowers and jewelry. He would live for a year as an embodiment of the god himself, followed, admired, worshipped. But at the end of that year, he would willingly walk the steps of the pyramid, break his flutes, and accept his fate. A lesson carved into the skin of the city itself. Greatness is fleeting, and destiny demands sacrifice. The mirror, always the mirror, was present during these ceremonies, positioned so that the chosen man could see himself at every stage, when he was elevated, when he was celebrated, and finally when he met the end of the path. For the ancients, the mirror did not lie. Unlike water, it did not distort. Unlike bronze, it did not flicker. Obsidian revealed, and revelation was often painful. The priests taught that Tezcatlipoca watched through every polished surface, observing the thoughts people tried to hide, the doubts they whispered only to themselves. They believed he saw the shadow of every action before the action took place. He was the god of destiny not because he controlled fate, but because he understood it. When later empires rose and began carving great mirrors of their own, they believed they were harnessing his sight. They believed that through the mirror, they could ask questions the world was not ready to answer. But what they did not understand was that every time they looked into that darkness, they were inviting Tezcatlipoca to look back. And he always did. The mirror did not speak with words. It spoke with images, with feelings, with glimpses of what may come. The priests said that Tezcatlipoca's laughter could sometimes be heard in the crackling of fire when someone asked a foolish question. And his anger could be felt when the mirror fogged over without explanation. Across the centuries, his myths only grew darker. Some claimed the god could take the form of a stranger on a lonely road, testing the generosity of travelers. Others said he whispered to kings in their sleep, planting seeds of doubt that later bloomed into catastrophe. Yet despite the fear his name invoked, one truth remained constant. Tezcatlipoca was not a god of destruction for its own sake. He was a god who revealed the truth that people tried hardest to escape. And in the obsidian mirror, the cold, shining, unyielding surface, his essence remained, waiting, watching, ready to show the next seeker a vision that might change the course of their life or their empire. They were known by many names: stone whisperers, shadow carvers, servants of the night. But to the priests of the great temples, they were simply called the makers. Their craft was older than memory, passed down quietly from father to son, from master to apprentice, through gestures and secrets never spoken aloud. These were the artisans who shaped obsidian mirrors, each one a piece of frozen lightning carved with such precision that even a single breath out of rhythm could ruin everything. Most people of the empire never saw these men work. Their workshops were hidden, tucked behind thick walls near the edges of temple complexes, or buried beneath plazas where thousands gathered without ever suspecting what lay beneath their feet. From afar, these workshops seemed like ordinary rooms, stone, dimly lit, silent. But inside, there was a tension in the air, as if the walls themselves understood that something sacred was unfolding. A visitor allowed inside, rare and always carefully chosen, would first notice the darkness. Not complete darkness, but a thick twilight broken only by narrow beams of light that slanted through openings in the ceiling. The makers preferred it this way. Bright light distracted the stone. They believed too much illumination woke the mirror inside before it was ready. And an awakened mirror could turn on the one shaping it. The floors were covered in volcanic dust so fine it drifted like mist when disturbed. Tools lay arranged with ritual precision. Thin bone scrapers, smooth river stones, deer-hide pads, polished sand, and countless shards of broken obsidian scattered like fragments of the night sky. Every tool had a purpose, every placement a meaning passed through generations. The work began long before the first cut ever touched the stone. A maker would sit cross-legged before a block of raw obsidian, resting his palms on its cool surface. He would close his eyes, steady his breathing, and wait. Some said they could feel the stone's mood, whether it was restless, patient, resistant, or eager. It was not superstition. It was experience. Obsidian was unpredictable. A flawless-looking block could conceal a hidden weakness waiting to burst outward with the first pressure of a tool. Another seemingly ordinary shard might contain the perfect density for a mirror. The makers insisted that obsidian had to choose its craftsman, not the other way around. When the right piece revealed itself, the ritual began. The artisan would draw invisible symbols over the stone. Prayers, pleas, warnings, before picking up the first tool. There was no room for error. One wrong stroke could send razor-sharp fragments flying, cutting deep enough to scar or even kill. Many makers bore fine lines across their arms, shoulders, and faces, marks from a lifetime of battles fought against the living stone. The shaping process was slow, almost burdened with reverence. First, the rough form was coaxed out with careful strikes, each one deliberate, each one whisper-soft despite the force required. The workshop would echo with a steady rhythm. Tap, tap, scrape. A quiet music that lasted from sunrise to sunset. Then, when the outline of the mirror emerged, the true test began. Polishing. To polish obsidian into a mirror was to negotiate with darkness itself. The makers used water mixed with powdered stone, smoothing the surface over and over until it began to lose its roughness. Hours became days, days became weeks. Their hands grew blistered, then calloused, then blistered again. They worked through pain without stopping. For them, pain was part of the exchange. The stone took a little of their flesh, and in return, it revealed its soul. Some mirrors resisted polishing. They absorbed water too quickly, leaving streaks that refused to disappear. Others cracked not from force but seemingly from displeasure, as if the stone rejected the reflection being shaped. There were times when an entire month's work was lost in a single moment. A soft pop, a shimmer of pressure, and the mirror split down the center. When this happened, the artisan stopped. He did not curse. He did not grieve. He simply whispered an apology to the stone and began again. The priests believed this was humility. The makers believed it was survival. Because among all their creations, there were certain mirrors meant for purposes they did not speak of. Mirrors intended only for the eyes of kings or priests. Mirrors so perfectly polished that the surface appeared bottomless, like a lake with no shore. These extraordinary pieces carried immense weight, political, spiritual, even existential, and crafting them was dangerous. Legends among the artisans spoke of mirrors that reflected things the makers themselves had not seen before. Flickers of faces that were not their own, movements in the stone that did not match their hands, shadows that clung to the glass long after the workshop had gone dark. Some makers claimed that during polishing, they felt a subtle pull, as if the mirror wanted them to lean closer, to look deeper, to surrender their thoughts into the void behind its surface. A few refused to work on such mirrors again. The priests never discouraged these fears. They understood the mirror's power better than anyone. They believed each mirror housed a fragment of divine sight, a thread connecting the mortal world to something beyond comprehension. The craftsmen were merely shaping the vessel. What filled it was not their concern. But one mirror changed everything. It began like all others. A large block of obsidian carried into the workshop by 4 men, their arms straining under its unnatural weight. The master artisan assigned to the piece was old, his hair silver, his eyes weary. Yet when he touched the stone, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Heat. A faint warmth pulsed beneath the surface, like a heartbeat hidden deep inside the rock. The others could not feel it, but he knew instantly. This was no ordinary obsidian. The stone had purpose. The work consumed him. He abandoned sleep, returning to the workshop even when his joints screamed in pain. But the stone responded eagerly, willingly. It polished faster than any he had ever shaped. It drank water like a thirsty beast. And when the first hint of reflection emerged, The old man stepped back, breathless. For the reflection was too clear. Not merely sharp, not merely perfect. Alive. He saw not just his face, but the flicker of a second figure behind him, a figure dressed in nothing he recognized. When he spun around, the workshop was empty. He tried again, leaning closer. The same figure standing still, waiting. But every time he turned, nothing was there. The old man never finished the mirror. One morning, his apprentices found the workshop silent. Tools untouched, the stone perfectly polished, and the master gone. No struggle, no signs of departure. Only a single handprint on the mirror's surface, smeared as if someone had tried to steady themselves moments before being pulled away. The priests sealed the mirror immediately. They understood what the artisans feared to name. Some mirrors reflected the world. Others reflected possibility. But this one looked back. The mirror should never have existed. That was the whispered belief among the priests, the artisans, and even the rulers who later inherited it. Long before it was sealed in darkness, long before its visions were consulted by emperors, this mirror was known by a different name, one the makers never spoke above a whisper. They called it the Forbidden One. Its creation was not ordered by a king, nor requested by priests. It began with a dream shared by several artisans on the same night, a voice rising from beneath the mountain, calling to them, describing a stone that wished to be released. In the dream, they walked through fire yet felt no pain. They reached the heart of the mountain and found a block of obsidian so large it seemed carved from the night itself. The artisans woke trembling. None of them spoke of the dream at first. Each believed it a personal vision. But when they gathered in the workshop the next morning, they found one of them already there, staring at a block of obsidian that had been delivered during the night. A block identical to the one in the dream. No record existed of who delivered it. The guards claimed no one had passed the gates. The apprentices swore they had seen no carts, no carriers, no footprints in the dust outside. The stone simply appeared, waiting. It was far larger than any obsidian piece they had ever seen, impossibly smooth, impossibly heavy. When they touched it, it was warm. Not the warmth of the sun. A deeper warmth, the kind found in the breath of animals or the pulse of a living body. The artisans argued. Some wanted to destroy it, fearing it was a bad omen. Others insisted it was a sign from the gods. In the end, curiosity won, curiosity always wins, and they began the process of shaping it. But this mirror was not carved the usual way. Tools seemed to slide along its surface as if guided by unseen hands. Edges polished themselves faster than the artisans could keep up. It was as if the stone wanted to become a mirror. Days passed. The artisans worked in silence, unable to explain the growing unease in their chests. Every night they dreamed the same dream again. The mountain, the voice, the fire. And each morning the mirror looked closer to completion, even when no one had touched it during the night. One apprentice began to refuse entering the workshop. He claimed he heard something behind the mirror, soft breaths, or perhaps faint footsteps. Another artisan insisted the mirror made the shadows longer. A third complained that when he polished one side, he saw a flicker of his mother's face in the stone. Even though she had been dead for years, the master artisan, the one who had shaped mirrors his entire life, was the only one who remained calm, or seemed to. His eyes began to sink into dark hollows. His voice grew thin. He barely slept, yet he refused to stop. He insisted the mirror had chosen him, that he alone could finish it. He spoke to the mirror, sometimes whispered, sometimes argued. On rare nights, laughing softly as if responding to a joke only he could hear. When his apprentices questioned him, he dismissed them. "The stone remembers," he said. "The stone speaks. You simply do not listen." The final polishing took place over a single night, a night the artisans would remember for the rest of their lives. They described the air as unnaturally cold, as though winter had entered the workshop despite the blazing summer outside. Torches burned smaller, their flames leaning away from the mirror. A strange tension filled the room, tightening their chests like invisible hands. Then, at the first hint of dawn, the mirror began to glow. Not with reflected light, with its own light. A soft silver radiance pulsed across the surface, growing stronger with each heartbeat. The master artisan stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. He placed both hands on the mirror and whispered, "It's ready." No one else dared move. The glow faded. The mirror turned black again. Deep, bottomless, perfect. The master took one slow breath, then leaned close to examine the surface. He did not make a sound when the handprint appeared. His apprentices saw it first. A pale print spreading across the glass, fingers long and thin, positioned on the opposite side of the mirror, touching outward, pressing from within. The master staggered backward. The apprentices screamed. Tools clattered to the ground as they rushed to the exit, but the door slammed shut on its own. The handprint remained, pressed, breathing, then slowly faded back into darkness. When the door finally opened, the artisans fled into the courtyard. They did not return for 3 days. During those 3 days, the master artisan disappeared. His workshop was silent except for the faint, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping gently on glass from the other side. The priests were summoned. They inspected the mirror, questioned the artisans, and finally sealed the workshop. The mirror was taken to the temple in a procession conducted in absolute silence. Even the birds that normally filled the air with sound seemed to vanish that morning. The priests placed the mirror in a chamber deep within the temple, where no light touched it. Guards were posted. Ritual protections were carved into the doorframe. No one was allowed inside. But secrecy never lasts long in an empire. Whispers spread. A mirror that moved on its own. A mirror that showed the dead. A mirror that answered questions not yet asked. A mirror that held a presence not of this world. Some said it showed the future. Others said it showed what the viewer most feared. Still others believed it contained a trapped spirit, perhaps one of the ancient gods, perhaps something older. The mirror remained hidden for generations. But history has a way of returning to what it cannot understand. When the Aztec Empire rose centuries later, scholars and priests searching the old storerooms discovered the sealed chamber. They expected relics. They expected idols. They did not expect a mirror that had been asleep for centuries. Yet when they entered, the chamber was warm, and the mirror was waiting. The moment the priests uncovered it, the torchlight in the room dimmed. Shadows crawled across the surface. A faint ripple passed through the glass, as though something beneath had stirred. The priests recognized its power instantly. They performed purification rituals, burned incense, chanted old names. But nothing changed. The mirror remained calm, silent, watching. Only when a young priest leaned close did the surface shift. Just once, just enough to reveal a fleeting image of something he could not fully describe. He fainted on the spot. After that, the mirror was locked away again. But this time, not forgotten. The empire would return to it. Its rulers would seek it. And one emperor in particular would dare to ask it questions no mortal should ever ask. The mirror waited. It always waited. And it always answered. The emperor had never feared anything. Not since the day he inherited the throne and the weight of a civilization settled onto his shoulders like a mantle of stone. Moctezuma Xocoyotzin was raised to believe he was chosen by the gods, that every breath he took was guided by unseen hands. His authority was absolute, his armies unmatched, his empire vast enough to swallow mountains and stretch across horizons. And yet, the first time he stood before the obsidian mirror, he felt small. The chamber was colder than any room in the palace. Even the thick cloak draped across his shoulders did nothing to stop the chill crawling along his spine. For priests stood behind him in silence, their faces hidden beneath jaguar and eagle masks. They had prepared the ritual with trembling hands, chanting protective verses to shield their emperor from whatever waited inside the mirror. Moctezuma dismissed their fear as superstition, until the moment he stepped inside. The mirror sat at the center of the chamber like a pool of still water carved into stone. It reflected nothing, not the light, not the room, not him. It was a void that absorbed everything, a hole punched through reality. He had been told about it since childhood. A forbidden mirror, a relic from a forgotten age. a sight that only the bravest rulers dared gaze into. But stories meant nothing compared to the presence of the thing itself. Standing before it, he felt as if he had walked into the jaws of an invisible beast. The high priest cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, when you are ready—" "Leave me," Moctezuma said. "But my lord, leave." The priests exchanged anxious glances but obeyed. The heavy door closed behind them, sealing the emperor alone with the mirror. The silence that followed was absolute. Moctezuma approached the obsidian surface slowly, each footstep echoing louder than expected. He had faced enemies on the battlefield. He had presided over sacrifices where hearts still beat as they were lifted to the sky. But nothing compared to the weight of this moment, this quiet confrontation between man and stone. He stopped an arm's length away. For a long time there was nothing, just cold blackness. He expected to see his reflection fade into view, distorted by candlelight. Instead, the mirror seemed to drink in the room's glow, leaving only darkness. Moctezuma steadied his breath. Then he spoke, not with arrogance, but with the quiet, solemn authority of a king addressing a god. "I seek truth." The mirror did not respond. Not at first. A faint tremor shivered across the glass, as if something deep within the stone had stirred. The emperor's muscles tightened, but he did not step back. He refused to show fear. Not to a piece of stone. Not to anything. Then the surface began to change. It did not brighten. It did not shimmer. Instead, the darkness thickened, deepening into a shade so absolute it seemed impossible. And from that darkness, faint outlines began to take shape. At first they were nothing more than ripples, shadows, illusions. But slowly, agonizingly slowly, the forms sharpened. Water. He saw water, stretching endlessly in every direction. But the water was wrong. It moved like a living creature, swelling and retreating with unnatural rhythm. The waves glowed faintly with an unfamiliar light, the reflection of something large, something huge, something moving across the surface. A structure, a shape, a ship. Moctezuma frowned. His people used canoes and rafts, small vessels designed for calm lakes and gentle rivers. But this thing in the mirror was monstrous. A floating fortress made of wood, towering above the waves like a mountain that refused to sink. He had never seen anything like it. No one in his empire had. Before he could make sense of it, figures appeared on the deck. Men. But not his men. These men wore skins of shining metal. Their faces were pale, paler than moonlight. Their hair hung like dried grass. And in their hands they held long sticks that glinted with something dangerous. Something cold. Moctezuma leaned in, eyes narrowing. What were those sticks? Weapons? Tools? Magic? Suddenly, one of the metal strangers lifted his weapon. A flash erupted from its end, bright and violent, like lightning tearing open the sky. A deafening roar shook the air. Moctezuma staggered back. He had never heard such a sound in his life. It was not the crack of thunder, nor the boom of a drum. It was something fierce, something unnatural. And whatever it was deadly. The mirror's image shifted. Now he saw land, his land. He recognized the coastline, the forests, the mountains. The strangers marched through it like predators exploring a new hunting ground. They carried banners decorated with symbols unfamiliar to his eyes. Their weapons screamed thunder again and again, cutting down warriors who fought with courage but had no defense against lightning. Moctezuma felt his heart pounding. His breath grew shallow. He reached out, almost touching the mirror. "What is this?" he whispered. "A warning? A promise?" The mirror did not answer with words. Instead, its surface darkened again. The images dissolved, scattering like ashes. Moctezuma waited for the blackness to fade. But this time something else emerged. A face. Not one of the strangers. His own. But it was older. Tired. Eyes sunken. Shoulders heavy. The face of a man broken by choices he could not undo. Behind him, smoke rose from his capital. Screams echoed through streets that should have been filled with music and celebration. The temples burned. The lake ran black. Moctezuma recoiled. He had never seen himself look so defeated, so powerless. The mirror pulsed. The emperor's reflection twisted, becoming a blur of movement and shadow. The images flickered faster and faster. Warriors fighting in chaos, temples collapsing, strangers raising banners over the ruined city. Moctezuma tried to step back, but the mirror pulled him forward. A magnetic force drew his gaze deeper into the abyss. He felt it burrowing into his mind, rewriting his thoughts, reshaping his certainty. He saw himself kneeling. He saw himself bound. He saw himself dying. "No," he growled, shaking his head. "This is not my fate." But the mirror did not care for his defiance. It showed him again and again, until the emperor's confidence cracked like obsidian under a hammer. When he finally tore himself away, gasping, drenched in sweat, the chamber felt colder than before. His legs nearly buckled beneath him. He clutched the edge of a stone table, fighting the urge to collapse. The mirror returned to stillness, its surface smooth and black, as if nothing had happened. The priests outside heard the sound of something falling. They rushed into the chamber, dropping to their knees before their trembling ruler. Moctezuma could not speak at first. When he finally did, his voice was a whisper. "Prepare the omens," he said. "The world is about to change." They tried to comfort him. They insisted the mirror showed possibilities, not certainties. But Moctezuma no longer believed that. He had seen something in the mirror's depths that no man should ever see. He had seen the end. And once a vision enters a king's heart, it does not stay silent. It begins to shape the choices he will make. The choices that will shape the empire. The days after Moctezuma's first encounter with the obsidian mirror did not feel like ordinary days. They moved strangely, slower, heavier, as if the very air in the palace had thickened. Servants noticed it first. They whispered among themselves that the emperor walked differently now. His steps quieter, his gaze distant. The nobles noticed too. His council of advisors found him withdrawn during meetings, staring at empty space as though listening to something only he could hear. But none of them knew the truth. Only Moctezuma carried the burden of what the mirror had shown him. The visions replayed again and again in his mind. The thunder weapons, the towering ships, the pale-faced strangers marching across his land like conquerors sent by unknown gods. He had always believed the empire stood under divine protection. Now, for the first time, he questioned everything. He returned to the mirror sooner than expected. The priests protested. They said one consultation per moon cycle was safest. They begged him to wait, fearing what repeated visions might do to the human mind. But Moctezuma brushed them aside. He was the emperor, and he needed answers. Before stepping into the chamber, he ordered all attendants to remain outside. His footsteps echoed in the room like the slow beating of a drum. The air felt alive, charged with something invisible, something expectant. The mirror sat waiting. As soon as he approached it, the surface rippled, as if greeting him. Moctezuma's voice was steady, but inside he trembled. "Show me more." The mirror obeyed. This time, the images did not begin with ships. They began with people, his own people. He saw them gathered in the plaza, their faces pale with fear, their hands trembling as they listened to rumors carried through the marketplace like smoke. Creatures emerging from the sea, men who did not die when struck by arrows, beasts with hooves like thunder. Fear spread like a disease. Moctezuma clenched his jaw. Fear was dangerous. Fear could break an empire faster than any enemy. The mirror shifted. Now he saw the nobles whispering behind closed doors, their eyes darting nervously. Some advised peace. Others insisted on war. A few wondered if the emperor had lost the favor of the gods. Their doubt was a poison, spreading quietly through the palace. The mirror did not stop. It showed him border captains dispatching scouts westward, messengers running until their lungs burned, priests burning incense in frantic rituals, trying to interpret omens that contradicted each other. One priest claimed a comet crossing the night sky meant destruction. Another insisted it meant renewal. A third said it meant nothing at all. Moctezuma's heart tightened. He realized the mirror was not only showing him the future. It was showing him the consequences of his reaction. Every vision fed into another. Every doubt became a seed. Every seed would grow into something he could not fully control. He tried to steady his breath. "What must I do?" he whispered. The mirror darkened. For a moment he saw nothing but blackness. Then, from the depths, an image emerged, not of warriors or omens, but of himself, standing alone, surrounded by advisors whose faces were hidden behind shadows. Moctezuma took a step back. The mirror was telling him a truth he did not want to see. His decisions were being shaped not by strategy but by fear. He pressed his palms against the cold stone wall behind him, steadying himself. Sweat trickled down his spine despite the chill in the chamber. His heart hammered not from what he saw, but from what it meant. If he allowed fear to rule him, the empire would crumble. But if he ignored the warning, would he be even more foolish? He turned away, but the mirror called to him, a silent pull on the edges of his consciousness. When he looked again, the surface had changed once more. Now it showed him the strangers entering his city, not as enemies but as guests. He saw himself greeting them with gifts, offering hospitality. For a brief, dizzying moment, the vision seemed peaceful. The strangers bowed. The priests stood calm. The people watched but did not panic. Was this the path of wisdom? Moctezuma leaned in, hope flickering faintly. Then the mirror shifted again. The peaceful vision dissolved, replaced by bloodshed. Smoke rising from temples. Cries echoing across canals. The strangers turning hostile. Warriors falling. The palace stormed. Moctezuma himself dragged from his chambers. The emperor stumbled backward so violently that he nearly fell. His breath came in ragged gasps. The mirror pulsed like a heartbeat, as if feeding on his panic. "No," he whispered. "I will not listen to this." But he already had. The damage was done. He could not unsee anything. The mirror darkened, becoming smooth and calm again. It waited for him to ask another question. But Moctezuma turned away, trembling. He left the chamber without a word to the priests waiting outside, their anxious eyes following him. From that day on, he made decisions differently. He summoned spies from every corner of the empire. He demanded reports from coastal villages. He began preparing offerings not of celebration, but of supplication. He visited temples at night, seeking signs in fire, water, and smoke. When priests delivered contradictory interpretations, he lashed out. Not in anger, but in desperation. The council grew confused. Nobles whispered among themselves. And through all of it, Moctezuma kept returning to the mirror. He came to it in the dead of night, after palace torches had dimmed. He came when his mind felt clouded, hoping for clarity. He came when he woke gasping from dreams of foreign shadows. But each time, the mirror showed him possibilities, never certainty. Possibilities that contradicted each other, weaving webs of doubt. He began to trust the mirror more than the wisdom of his generals. He began to question the loyalty of those around him. He began to doubt his own strength. Every vision became a thread pulling him in a different direction. Every possibility became an obsession. A single tool meant for guidance became a labyrinth with no exit. And yet he kept staring because he believed he had no other choice. Because the weight of an empire rested on his shoulders. Because he thought he could outsmart destiny if he only looked hard enough. But the mirror was not showing him destiny. It was showing him fear. And fear, once planted in the heart of a king, grows faster than any prophecy. Outside the palace, life continued. Children played along the canals. Merchants shouted prices. Priests burned incense. But something subtle had shifted. Attention hung over the capital like an invisible fog. The empire could feel the emperor changing. And the mirror continued its silent work, shaping the decisions of a man who believed he was shaping his own fate. The years leading up to the stranger's arrival would later be called the Omen years. Even generations after the fall of the empire, elders whispered of that time with a mixture of awe and dread, as though the universe itself had been trying to speak. But no one knew how to listen without fear twisting the message. It began with a flame. One night, without warning, the temple of Huitzilopochtli burst into fire. Not the bright, hungry fire of wood and wind, but a silent flame. A column of light rising into the sky without consuming the temple beneath it. Guards swore the fire moved as if alive, bending and twisting like a serpent made of gold. No heat spread from it. No smoke choked the air. By dawn it had vanished, leaving behind no ash, no scorch marks, nothing to explain what had happened. Moctezuma stared at the untouched stone for a long time, his breath shallow. Fire that does not burn is not fire, the priests whispered. It is a message. But from whom? And why now? Days later, an omen of the sky appeared. A comet bright, huge, trailing a tail of silver, cut across the heavens with such brilliance that it turned night into twilight. People ran into the streets, falling to their knees, some crying, others praying, others staring in terrified silence. Even the warriors, hardened by years of battle, froze at the sight. Moctezuma watched the comet from the palace steps, gripping the stone railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. The obsidian mirror had already planted seeds of fear in his mind. Now the heavens themselves seemed to be confirming his dread. The omens continued. In Tlatelolco, a great lightning bolt struck the corner of a temple. Yet there was no thunder, no storm, no clouds, only a silent flash that split stone like an invisible blade. In the countryside, farmers found water boiling in the canals, though the air was cool and still. Fish floated to the surface, as if fleeing something beneath. In the heart of the capital, people claimed to hear a woman's cry echoing through the night, her voice trembling with agony. She wandered the streets, unseen but heard, her wail drifting across the water. "My children, we must leave. The time has come." Some called her a ghost. Others said she was a goddess mourning the future. But to Moctezuma, the cry pierced deeper. It sounded like an empire grieving its own unborn fate. And then came the strangest omen of all. One morning, palace guards found a fisherman kneeling by the lake, shaking uncontrollably. He had discovered something drifting in the water. A bird, unlike any seen before, black-feathered, with eyes that shimmered like polished obsidian. When the guards approached, the fisherman pointed at the creature's head. Embedded in its skull was a mirror, a small, perfect circle of shining stone reflecting the sky. The mirror showed not the fisherman's face, nor the guards, but something else, something far away. A group of figures marching through tall grass, their armor glinting, their footsteps synchronized, their weapons long, sharp, foreign. Moctezuma demanded to see it himself. He knelt before the bird, still alive, still trembling as if carrying a burden too heavy for its fragile body. When he looked into the mirror, his breath caught. He saw them, the same figures from the obsidian mirror, the same pale faces, the same thunder weapons. This time he understood. The omen was not a warning. It was confirmation. The empire's fate had already begun to move toward him. The priests debated endlessly. Some argued that the omens foretold great change, not necessarily destruction. Others insisted the gods were signaling a test of courage. A few believed that Moctezuma himself was the cause, that the gods were displeased with his fear, his hesitation, his dependence on visions instead of wisdom. But Moctezuma listened to none of them. His mind was now tethered to the mirror. Every omen seemed like an echo of what he had already seen. Every sign reinforced the belief that destiny was tightening around him like a snare. He began withdrawing from the council. He spent long nights alone in the palace gardens, staring into the still waters of the lake. Servants found him sitting silently in the dark, listening to something, or someone. Only he could hear. The city felt the shift. Markets grew quieter. Families whispered of curses. Warriors sharpened their blades not out of confidence, but out of dread. Even the children sensed the unease, asking their mothers why the emperor no longer smiled during ceremonies. The empire was trembling, and no one dared say it aloud. Moctezuma visited the mirror again during this time, but he no longer asked it questions. Instead, he stood before it in silence, waiting for it to show him something new. For a time, it did not. Its surface remained still and cold, offering no visions. But in that stillness, Moctezuma found no comfort. The silence felt worse. Felt like the breath between two words, the pause before a blade falls. He paced the chamber, gripping the edges of his cloak, his mind racing. Had he misinterpreted the visions? Had he done something to anger the mirror? Or did it simply have nothing left to show because the future was already decided? Outside, the people continued to witness strange events. A temple wall cracked without cause. A statue cried tears of water. A soldier swore that during training, his spear shadow stretched farther than his spear itself, stretching and stretching until it merged with the shadow of the temple. Every sign fed back into the same fear. Something was coming, something powerful, something foreign, something unstoppable. As the omens multiplied, Moctezuma's courage shrank. He knew what he had seen. He knew what the mirror had shown him. He knew the empire stood on the edge of something vast and terrible. But he did not know how to stop it. And somewhere, far across the sea, the strangers drew closer. Their ships cut through the waves. Their metal armor glinted under foreign skies. Their thunder weapons rested ready. The empire had felt their shadow long before they arrived. And the mirror had shown the emperor everything, but not how to escape it. The first reports came from the coast. Rumors at first, drifting like smoke across villages and marketplaces. Fishermen spoke of seeing great mountains on the horizon, mountains that moved against the wind. Children claimed to hear distant thunder on clear days. Hunters returned pale, insisting strange creatures had been spotted near the shoreline. Beasts with hooves that struck the earth like drumbeats, snorting clouds of steam. At first, few believed these stories. But then the messengers arrived. Exhausted, dust-covered, trembling. They stumbled into Tenochtitlan carrying news that would chill even the bravest warriors. The mountains were not mountains. They were ships, floating towers carved from foreign wood. Taller than any temple, larger than any canoe, moving across the surface of the sea like beasts with invisible legs. Their enormous white cloths billowed like wings, and from their sides hung objects of iron and rope. The strangers aboard them had skin like moonlight. The council chamber fell into a stunned silence as the messengers described them. Their words stumbled over each other. Metal-skinned warriors, towering beasts, thunder sticks that struck with the force of a storm. No one knew what to make of it. Moctezuma listened in a rigid, breathless stillness. He already knew. He had seen all of this in the mirror. But hearing it spoken aloud made the visions heavier, sharper. No longer phantoms but real shadows creeping into his world. When the emperor dismissed the messengers, he retreated to his private chambers, pacing like a man caught between two worlds. Outside, the nobles argued fiercely. Some demanded armies be sent immediately. Others insisted the strangers might be gods or envoys of gods. A few whispered that this was the return of the feathered serpent himself, fulfilling ancient prophecy. But the emperor slipped away from their noise. He needed to see for himself. That evening, Moctezuma climbed to the top of the great temple. The city spread beneath him in shimmering lights, lanterns glowing across the canals, torches flickering near the markets, the lake reflecting the moon like polished silver. From this height, everything looked peaceful, eternal. Yet the horizon felt wrong. The air tasted different. As he gazed westward, toward the sea beyond the valley, he felt the same chill that had haunted him since the first vision. A chill born not of cold but of destiny. The strangers were coming, and the mirror had shown what their arrival would bring. The next morning, scouts returned with further reports. The strangers had landed. Their metal armor shone like captured sunlight. Their faces were hidden beneath helmets. Their animals, horses, though no one knew that word, towered over men, their eyes burning with unsettling intelligence. And they carried thunder. The first encounter was brief. A group of coastal warriors approached to challenge the invaders. They raised their spears, shouted warnings, prepared to fight. The strangers responded with fire. A deafening explosion tore through the air as a metal tube erupted with smoke and lightning. A warrior fell instantly. Not pierced, not cut, but torn open by a force no one could see. The others fled, terrified, believing the strangers were conjuring storms with their hands. Word of the thunder weapons spread faster than the wind. Moctezuma summoned the council. The room pulsed with tension as the nobles argued over strategy. Some insisted they should strike now, before the strangers could gather strength. Others claimed no mortal weapon could defeat creatures who commanded lightning. The emperor listened, silent as stone. His advisors watched him carefully. They remembered the old Moctezuma, the decisive warrior prince who led armies with fire in his eyes. But that fire had dimmed. The mirror had changed him. When one general insisted they must kill the strangers before they grew bold, Moctezuma's voice finally broke the silence. "We cannot fight beings who command thunder." The room erupted into chaos. Voices rose in disbelief. Priests tried to calm the nobles. Generals stared at the emperor as if seeing him for the first time. One elder stepped forward. "My lord," he whispered, "they bleed like men. They die like men. They are not gods." Moctezuma did not meet his eyes. In his mind, the mirror replayed the same vision again and again. The strangers marching through his streets, fire swallowing his temples, his people screaming. And in every version, war only hastened the destruction. Fear had carved itself into the emperor's heart. He finally raised a hand to silence the room. "We will welcome them," he said quietly. "With gifts, with peace, with honor." The nobles froze. It was the most unexpected decision Moctezuma could have made. The general who spoke earlier clenched his jaw. "You wish to invite them into the empire?" "I wish," Moctezuma replied slowly, "to avoid what I have seen." He did not elaborate. He did not speak of the mirror. But everyone in the chamber felt the weight of something unseen guiding him. As preparations began, the atmosphere in the capital shifted. Runners were dispatched to gather precious gold, elaborate cloaks, rare jewels. Gifts meant to impress the strangers or distract them. Priests performed purification rituals on the palace steps. Nobles rehearsed greetings, their voices trembling. All the while, Moctezuma returned again and again to the edge of the palace terraces, staring toward the horizon, waiting, watching, listening for the distant thunder. At last, one morning, the sound reached the city. A strange clatter of metal, the rhythmic thud of hooves. Gasps and cries echoed through the streets as the strangers finally entered Tenochtitlan. The empire held its breath. Moctezuma stood at the heart of the city, surrounded by guards. His cloak shimmered with jade and turquoise. His headdress towered like a rayed sun. But beneath the splendor, his hands trembled. He had seen this moment in the mirror. Not once, many times. The strangers approached slowly, their armor gleaming. Their horses snorted and pawed at the stone causeway. At their head rode a man with a hard face and eyes sharp as flint. Hernán Cortés. Though Moctezuma did not know his name, he recognized him. The mirror had already shown him the man who would change everything. For a heartbeat, both leaders stared at one another. Two worlds, two destinies. The emperor bowed slightly, an ancient gesture of respect. The stranger extended his hand. The moment their hands touched, the air seemed to shift, as though the city itself exhaled reluctantly. Far away, in the temple chamber, the obsidian mirror remained still, dark, silent, watching. The empire had stepped onto the path the mirror had shown, and there was no turning back. For days after entering the vast capital, the Spaniards moved like men walking through a dream they did not trust. Everything around them seemed impossible. The glittering canals, the floating gardens, the temples that towered like mountains, the markets larger than any in Europe. But nothing unsettled them more than the silence that followed them through the streets. Thousands of eyes watched from doorways, balconies, rooftops. Eyes that did not blink. Eyes that judged. Cortés felt it most of all. He had marched into cities before, Havana, Veracruz, but nothing was like this. Tenochtitlan breathed. It had a rhythm, a pulse, a presence. Even he, hardened by ambition and war, felt a weight settle over him the moment he crossed its causeways. The emperor, Moctezuma, treated them with a strange reverence. He welcomed them into the palace, offered food and gifts, spoke with measured calm. Yet beneath his courtesy ran an undercurrent of fear. Cortez sensed it. He studied the emperor's eyes the way a wolf studies the hesitation of a stag, recognizing vulnerability long before the stag realizes it is wounded. And then, on a quiet evening lit only by braziers and perfumed incense, the emperor made a request. He wanted to show Cortez something. No translator understood why Moctezuma insisted on it. No guard dared question him. The emperor's voice was steady, yet something in it betrayed a trembling curiosity, or perhaps resignation. Cortez accepted without hesitation. Curiosity was the one weakness he never denied. Moctezuma led them through a series of corridors deep within the palace, each one darker than the last. The torches burned low, casting shadows that clung to the walls like spirits. The Spaniards exchanged nervous glances. This was not a public chamber, nor a ceremonial hall. This felt hidden, forbidden. At the end of the passage stood a heavy stone door carved with symbols none of the Spaniards recognized. Eagles, jaguars, eyes, mirrors. Moctezuma placed his palm against the door. It opened without a sound. The chamber beyond was cold, unnaturally so. The air felt still, as if preserved for centuries. Cortez stepped inside cautiously, his boots echoing softly. A faint smell of incense hung in the air, but beneath it lingered something sharper, metallic, ancient. The walls were lined with cloth to absorb sound. Torches flickered, but their light seemed unable to fully touch the center of the room. That was where it stood. The mirror, a perfect disk of obsidian, polished to a darkness that seemed deeper than night. It sat atop a stone pedestal carved with symbols of the smoking mirror deity. Even from a distance it felt alive, pulling at the edges of vision, bending the light around it. Cortez frowned. He had seen mirrors before, small ones of polished metal, crude ones hammered by hand. But this was something else. It made his skin prickle, as though he had stepped too close to a cliff in thick fog. Moctezuma gestured toward it. "Look." Cortez hesitated. For the first time since entering this empire, the conquistador felt genuine unease. Not fear, he would never admit fear, but a cold curiosity, the kind that warns a man he is stepping into something larger than himself. He approached slowly. His reflection did not appear. He stood directly in front of it, yet saw only darkness. Deep, endless darkness. He leaned closer, expecting to see the faint outline of his face. Nothing. The surface did not behave like glass. It behaved like a pool of shadow. He raised a hand, stopping inches from the surface. Behind him, Moctezuma watched with a tense stillness, as if waiting for a verdict from the stone itself. Cortez inhaled sharply. Something moved, not on the surface, behind it. A flicker, a ripple, a shifting silhouette. He thought it might be a trick of the torchlight, yet no flame had gone out. The darkness inside the mirror swirled, gathering, thickening. For a heartbeat, Cortez's breath froze. He saw shapes, a coastline, a ship burning, men fleeing through smoke, and among them himself. He jerked back as if struck. The vision vanished instantly, swallowed by the mirror. He blinked hard, chest rising and falling. The room felt colder. Moctezuma watched him, the emperor's expression unreadable. "What did you see?" the translator asked cautiously. Cortez said nothing. He did not trust the images. He did not trust the emperor. Most of all, he did not trust how the mirror had made him feel, exposed, vulnerable, like prey being studied. He forced himself to step closer again, if only to prove he wasn't shaken. But this time the mirror remained still, empty, reflecting nothing. Moctezuma slowly approached. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The mirror shows what lies beneath the world," he said. "It reveals paths, choices, shadows that walk ahead of us." Cortez kept his face expressionless, but inside the words struck a tender nerve. He had left Spain chasing glory, chasing destiny. He believed he was chosen. Yet the vision, if it truly was a vision, had shown defeat. He refused to accept it. The emperor stepped even closer, lowering his voice. "Does your God give such signs?" he asked. It was not a mocking question. It was sincere. Cortés did not answer. His mind worked rapidly. Moctezuma was vulnerable, afraid, guided by visions he barely understood. This mirror, whatever force it held over the emperor, was the key. The empire's spine was not its armies or temples. It was belief, and belief could be shattered. Cortés took one final breath, staring at the mirror that had confronted him with something he never wanted to see. He felt the chill travel through his bones, then buried it under ambition. Behind him, the emperor whispered something too soft to decipher. Prayer. A warning. A plea. Then Moctezuma extinguished the torches, plunging the chamber into darkness. When they stepped out into the corridor again, Cortés said nothing about what he had seen. Not to his men, not to his captains, not to himself. But from that moment on, he moved differently. His ambition sharpened. His ruthlessness deepened. And somewhere, in the dark chamber behind the stone door, the mirror rested in silence. Perhaps satisfied, perhaps waiting, perhaps having recognized one thing clearly in the heart of the Spaniard who dared stare into it. He, too, was destined to break an empire. The palace had always been a place of ceremony, elegance, and power. Its walls carried the laughter of nobles, the songs of priests, the steady rhythm of an empire confident in its own immortality. But after the strangers entered Tenochtitlan, the palace changed. Its halls grew quieter. Its torches burned lower. Its shadows lengthened in ways no one dared comment on. It was as if the stone itself sensed what was coming. Moctezuma sat in the Hall of Feathers, surrounded by courtiers who spoke in hushed voices, their words trembling like birds trapped in a storm. The emperor's cloak shimmered with gold and turquoise, but the man beneath the garments seemed smaller than before, diminished by doubt, weighed down by an invisible burden. The mirror's visions had not left him. Neither had the omens. Neither had the presence of the foreigners walking the streets of his sacred city as though inspecting a prize. Every day, Cortés sent his captains to explore the city. They spoke loudly, laughed boldly, pointed at canals and temples with arrogant curiosity. Moctezuma noticed how his people flinched when the thunder weapons gleamed in the sun. The Spaniards acted as if nothing could harm them. They moved like men protected by some unseen shield. This frightened the emperor more than any vision. Fear whispered through the palace corridors. Servants rushed by with their heads down. Nobles debated in corners. Priests flooded the temples with incense until the air grew thick with it, trying desperately to drown out the sense that the gods had gone silent. Then came the breaking point. A group of Spanish soldiers assaulted a noblewoman. No one knew exactly where or when, but the rumor spread like wildfire. Warriors demanded justice. Generals begged Moctezuma to act, to drive the invaders out before the people rebelled. But Moctezuma hesitated. Every request for action collided with the memory of the mirror's visions, the burning temples, the screams, the collapse. He believed resistance would lead directly to the destruction he had seen. If he attacked, he thought he would be fulfilling the prophecy. So he did nothing. That was the mistake Cortés had been waiting for. The conquistador understood power better than any priest. He recognized the emperor's hesitation, saw the cracks forming in the empire's foundation. And he knew something Moctezuma could not imagine, that empires fall not from weakness alone, but from doubt that spreads like a sickness. Cortés struck first. On a day like any other, while Moctezuma sat in council, the Spaniards gathered in the palace courtyard, tightening armor and loading powder into their thunder weapons. Their horses stamped restlessly, sensing tension in the air. Before anyone understood what was happening, Cortés marched directly to the emperor's chambers. The guards, unsure how to react, hesitated. They looked to their emperor, but Moctezuma rose calmly. "I will speak with them," he said. It was the worst decision he ever made. Cortés met him with a polite bow, but there was iron in his eyes. His words, delivered through a translator, were soft, almost respectful. "For your safety," he said, "and ours, we must ask you to accompany us." Moctezuma blinked, confused. "Accompany you where?" The answer came not with words, but with movement. Spanish soldiers stepped forward, surrounding him. Their metal armor glinted with cold light. Their weapons were angled subtly but unmistakably. The emperor's guards reached for their macuahuitl blades, but Moctezuma raised a trembling hand. "No!" That single word shattered whatever courage remained in the room. The guards froze. The nobles stared. Cortés smiled faintly. Moctezuma took a single step forward, and the palace, for the first time in its long, glorious history, watched its living god walk out surrounded by foreign soldiers. The city reacted with disbelief. Crowds gathered outside the palace walls as word spread. Mothers held their children close. Warriors gripped their weapons in confusion. Priests whispered frantic prayers, staining their hands with ash and blood. No one could comprehend what they were seeing. The emperor, divine, chosen, eternal, was being held inside his own palace by pale strangers with thunder in their hands. At first, Cortés treated him with deceptive courtesy. The emperor kept his robes, his attendants, his meals. But he was no longer free. His every movement was watched. His nights were restless. His thoughts spiraled into dark corners he had never known. The mirror haunted him. He could not ask for it now. The Spaniards would never allow him into the sacred chambers. But he did not need the mirror to remember. The images it had shown him replayed in his mind with cruel clarity. His fear deepened into something worse, regret. He had believed that welcoming the strangers would protect his people. Instead, it had weakened him. Outside the palace, unrest grew. Warriors paced the streets with clenched jaws. Young nobles demanded that the emperor be freed. Some whispered that Moctezuma was no longer fit to rule. Others insisted he had been bewitched by foreign demons. But no one knew what to do. The empire was paralyzed. Inside his gilded prison, Moctezuma stared through the lattice windows at the city he once commanded with absolute authority. The lake shimmered under the sun, reflecting the temples, the homes, the floating gardens. But to him it looked different now. Everything looked like a fading dream. His advisors visited him, begging for orders. Should they fight? Should they negotiate? Should they gather the armies? Every time, his answer was the same: wait. Wait for what? He could not say. He only knew that the mirror had shown destruction. Whether by his hand or theirs he could no longer tell. Days bled into nights, nights into days. The palace filled with the sounds of foreign armor and foreign voices. The empire waited in silence for a sign that never came. The obsidian mirror sat undisturbed in its chamber. But perhaps it did not need to show more. Its work was already unfolding. The emperor who once stood unshakable had cracked. The empire that once shimmered like a jewel had been thrust into shadow. The mirror had not lied. The collapse had begun. Night fell on Tenochtitlan like a suffocating blanket. The air felt heavy, thick with tension, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. It was the night after Moctezuma's death. Whether by Spanish hands, by his own people, or by his own despair, no one could agree. The empire had lost its voice, its anchor, its center, and in that vacuum of power, chaos rushed in like a storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky bore no clouds. Drums echoed from the outskirts of the city, not ceremonial rhythms, but the sharp, angry beats of warriors gathering for battle. Rumors spread faster than torches could be lit. The emperor was dead. The Spaniards were cornered in the palace. The gods demanded retribution. The people surged into the streets in a tide of fury. Inside the palace, the Spaniards barricaded themselves behind wooden beams and overturned tables, clutching their weapons, eyes darting toward every doorway. The courtyard glowed with torchlight, shadows leaping against the walls like restless spirits. Horses stamped nervously. Armor clattered. The men whispered prayers, cursed their situation, or stared silently into the dark. No one slept. No one could. And deep within the palace, through corridors choked with smoke and fear, lay a chamber that had been silent for weeks. A chamber whose stone door was carved with jaguar fangs, serpent scales, and the unmistakable symbol of the smoking mirror. Behind that door, the obsidian mirror waited, untouched since Moctezuma's imprisonment. But nothing stays hidden during the collapse of an empire. Sometime after midnight, as the city roared with rebellion, a small band of warriors broke through the palace walls. They were young, driven not by strategy but by the raw, explosive energy of rage. Their faces were painted with ash and blood. Their breaths came in sharp, furious bursts. They moved not with caution, but with purpose. Instead of heading toward the Spaniards' sleeping quarters, they ran deeper. They were searching for the heart of the palace, for the object they believed had poisoned their emperor's mind. They were searching for the mirror. The corridor leading to the chamber was surprisingly quiet. No Spaniards guarded it. They did not know what lay behind that door. Even the Aztecs rarely entered this part of the palace. But the warriors moved confidently. Rumors had long whispered of this place. The mirror that twisted fate. The mirror that clouded Moctezuma's judgment. The mirror that showed visions no mortal should see. When they reached the door, the leader of the group placed a hand against the cold stone. "Help me lift it," he whispered. The others joined him. Together they pressed, their muscles straining. The door groaned. A low, heavy sound that seemed to reverberate through the bones. Dust fell from the ceiling. The corridor shivered with tension. Finally, the door slid open. The warriors stepped into darkness. At first, they saw nothing. The chamber felt like the inside of a tomb, air stale, cold as river water. Their torches barely penetrated the blackness, as if the walls themselves were swallowing the light. Then they noticed the pedestal at the center of the room. And on it, the mirror. It reflected nothing. The warriors approached it carefully, like men stepping toward a sleeping beast. The leader raised his torch, illuminating the surface. The firelight did not brighten it. Instead, the mirror seemed to pull the flame inward, drinking its glow. One of the younger warriors shivered. "It watches us." The leader swallowed hard. "It watched our emperor. It deceived him. It weakened him. Tonight we free the empire from its shadow." He lifted his spear. The others hesitated. No one knew what would happen if the mirror was harmed. It was a relic older than their empire, a vessel for visions, a weapon of the gods. But anger is a force more powerful than caution. The leader smashed the spear against the mirror. A sound rang out, a sharp, metallic note that did not match the wood or obsidian. The mirror did not crack. It did not shift. It stood silent, unbroken, as if the spear had struck the air itself. Another warrior stepped forward. He swung his macuahuitl blade. The obsidian teeth slammed against the mirror's surface. The room shook. The torches flickered violently. The blow should have shattered the mirror. Obsidian, for all its sharpness, was brittle. But this mirror did not behave like stone. It behaved like something alive. The younger warrior stepped back, fear ripping through his chest. "It cannot be broken," he whispered. The leader, frustrated beyond reason, grabbed the pedestal with both hands and heaved. The mirror toppled, slamming against the ground. This time it cracked. The sound was like thunder exploding inside the chamber. A thin, jagged fracture spidered across the surface. Small at first, then rapidly branching outward until the entire mirror was a web of splitting darkness. The warriors stumbled back as the mirror began to pulse. Dimly at first, then brighter, as if a heart had been awakened inside it. The air grew cold. The stone floor trembled. And from the fractured mirror came a faint sound. An echo, a whisper, a breath that did not belong to any of the men in the chamber. One warrior ran. Another dropped his weapon in terror. The leader stood frozen, unable to move as the cracks widened. A sliver of light escaped, pale, eerie, unnatural. It washed over his face like a ghostly hand. His breath caught. For a moment he saw something inside the mirror. Not a reflection. A face. Not human. Something ancient. Something watching. something that had been trapped for centuries and now stirred at the scent of chaos. Then the mirror shattered completely. A burst of cold swept through the room like a winter wind. The torches died instantly. The darkness became absolute, thick, suffocating, alive. When the palace guards arrived minutes later, they found the chamber empty. Only shards of obsidian remained, scattered across the floor like fragments of night. The warriors who entered the room were never seen again. Some believed they had fled during the chaos. Others whispered that the mirror had taken them. And a few murmured something far more terrifying, that breaking the mirror had not destroyed its power, it had released it. Outside, the city burned. Screams echoed over the canals. The Spaniards struggled to hold their ground. Warriors surged through the streets like waves of vengeance. But in the dark heart of the palace, the mirror's fragments lay silent, waiting, and somewhere, deep within the cracks, something new began to wake. The obsidian mirror was lost in the chaos of the empire's collapse. Some said it had shattered. Others claimed it had vanished before the warriors ever reached it. A few whispered that the pieces were gathered by beings not of this world. No one truly knew what happened that night. The palace burned. The lake reflected the glow of torches and screams. The Spaniards fled under cover of darkness. And the mirror, whether broken or stolen, slipped into the shadows of history. Yet its story was not over. Objects of power do not simply disappear. They travel. Years passed. The Aztec temples lay in ruins. The great city on the lake was forced into a new shape, its canals drained, its pyramids dismantled stone by stone. The survivors told their children stories of gods betrayed, of visions lost, of a mirror that once showed the future. But the Spaniards had no interest in such stories. They were obsessed with gold, with silver, with tribute. Still, some among them collected stranger trophies. And somewhere, hidden in a crate among stolen artifacts, an object wrapped in cloth began its journey across an ocean. The voyage was long. The ship creaked under waves that rose like dark mountains. Storms hurled rain and lightning at the wooden vessel. Sailors whispered of bad luck, of curses brought aboard from the conquered lands. Some nights, men woke screaming, claiming they had seen faces in the water staring up from beneath the ship's hull. Faces pale and cold, drifting just out of reach. One night, when the sea was eerily calm, a sailor on watch heard a faint tapping below deck. Tap, 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 steady as a heartbeat. The man froze. The sound was coming from one of the storage crates. He lifted his lantern, took a shaky step forward. Tap, tap, tap. He opened the crate. Inside lay a circular object wrapped in tattered cloth. The cloth shifted as though something beneath it exhaled. The sailor recoiled, slamming the lid shut and whispering a prayer. He told no one what he had heard. But from that night on, the tapping continued until the ship reached Europe, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to keep the crew awake. When the ship finally docked in Seville, the crates were unloaded without ceremony. Merchants inspected their contents. Priests catalogued idols and sculptures. Scholars debated which items were worthy of royal attention. But one crate was different. It was claimed by a collector, a nobleman obsessed with exotic objects from distant lands. He prided himself on owning artifacts no other Spaniard possessed. Carved masks, golden feathers, ceremonial knives, strange books filled with unfamiliar glyphs. When he opened the crate containing the mirror, he frowned. The object inside was cracked. A single fracture ran across its surface like a scar. He ordered it polished, but no matter how much his servants scrubbed, the mirror refused to shine. It absorbed light greedily, drawing lantern glow into its depths until the room grew dim. The nobleman should have discarded it. Instead, he kept it in his study. Visitors who entered the room often paused, unable to explain the sudden chill that seeped into their bones. Some refused to turn their backs on the cracked black disc. Others felt the urge to cover it with a cloth. A few stared too long and walked away visibly shaken, their eyes unfocused. The nobleman, curious by nature, stared at it often. One evening he leaned close, hoping to see his reflection. He saw nothing. Then, For a heartbeat, he saw movement behind him. He spun around. Nothing. After that, he avoided the mirror at night. When he died suddenly, choking at a dinner table despite no sign of illness, his collection was auctioned off. The mirror was purchased for a modest sum by a merchant dealing in curiosities. He sold it to a scholar in London, who examined it under candlelight, marveling at its craftsmanship, its unsettling beauty. He wrote in his journal, "This mirror is unlike any I have encountered. It seems to drink the flame of the candle. When I draw near, I feel a slight pressure upon my temples, as though something is watching. It is ancient, and it is dangerous." He kept it for a year. During that time, he suffered nightmares, visions of cities burning, of men in armor marching beneath foreign skies, of faces reflected in water, screaming without sound. Sometimes he woke to find the mirror on the opposite side of the room from where he had left it. His colleagues insisted he was exhausted. He insisted he was cursed. He sold the mirror to a man who specialized in occult objects, a collector whose library was filled with grimoires, alchemical instruments, and relics from forgotten rituals. That man's name was not widely known, but one of his closest associates was a scholar, a mathematician, an astrologer, a man who spent his life seeking knowledge forbidden to most, convinced that the universe hid secrets meant only for those who dared to ask without fear. His name was John Dee. The English court whispered of him as a magician. Queen Elizabeth herself sought his counsel. And when the obsidian mirror came into his possession, he recognized it instantly, not as a curiosity, not as a relic, but as a tool that could open doors. When Dee touched the cracked surface for the first time, he felt a chill race up his spine. Not cold, but something else, something alive. He leaned close, breath trembling, and whispered a single word, "Show me." The mirror did not speak, but it listened. And as it listened, the story of the obsidian mirror, born in fire, shaped by ancient hands, carried across oceans, soaked in blood and prophecy, prepared to enter its next chapter. A chapter that would not unfold in an empire of lakes and pyramids, but in the shadowed chambers of Elizabethan England. The mirror arrived at Mortlake on a fog-soaked morning, wrapped in layers of wool and bound tightly with cord, as though whoever packaged it feared it might slip out on its own. John Dee stood at the doorway of his study as the servants carried it in. He wore a long black robe, its sleeves smudged with ink and wax from long nights spent bent over manuscripts. His mind was already consumed with celestial charts and coded angelic alphabets. He had no idea that the object he was about to unwrap would soon eclipse all other obsessions. He dismissed the servants and locked the door. The study fell silent except for the soft tapping of rain against the window. Dee moved slowly, reverently, untying the knots with trembling fingers. The cloth fell away. The mirror looked back at him, cracked, dark, unearthly. He inhaled sharply, not out of fear but recognition. Dee had read of such objects in ancient manuscripts, scattered references to black speculi, shadow portals, and the eyes of angels. Some were dismissed as myths. Some were banned by the church. Some were said to be so dangerous that even touching them could blur the boundary between the mortal world and the unseen. But none of the descriptions, not even the most fevered, had prepared him for the weight of this mirror's presence. It devoured light like a living thing. As he moved a candle closer, the flame thinned, stretched, and seemed to retreat into the black surface. The mirror glimmered faintly, but not with reflection. More like a pulse, a deep, slow throb, as if something inside the stone was breathing. Dee whispered to himself, trembling with excitement. At last, a channel. He had spent years searching for a way to speak with angels. Not for glory, not even for magic, but for understanding. To him, knowledge was the language of God, and angels were the librarians of the universe. But every method he tried had failed. Astrology, geometry, scrying in glass bowls, invoking spirits through crystal orbs. Each gave only glimpses, fragments, whispers. Never enough. And now here, in front of him, lay a mirror that felt older than any church or crown. a relic carved by hands that believed knowledge was not something to study, but something to surrender to. He touched the cold surface. A jolt shot through him. Not pain, not cold, something deeper, like a word spoken just beneath the threshold of hearing. He lifted the mirror and placed it on a velvet-covered table, angled slightly upward. Then he sat before it, folding his hands. "Show me," he whispered. The mirror remained dark, but he felt it listening. That night he wrote in his diary, "The obsidian stone stirs my soul. It is as though it recognizes me, as though it tests me." Days passed. Dee meditated in front of the mirror for hours. At first, nothing happened. But then, little by little, the shadows inside the obsidian began to shift. Not visibly, more like a sensation, a presence pressing gently against the edge of awareness. Dee needed help. A medium, someone who could see what he could not. Enter Edward Kelly. Kelly arrived at Mortlake with a reputation steeped in rumor. Alchemist, thief, visionary, liar, genius, madman. His eyes were sharp, hungry, restless. His voice carried confidence that bordered on arrogance. Dee studied him with caution, but he also sensed that Kelly could see into places ordinary men avoided. He placed the mirror before him. "Look into it," Dee instructed. Kelly hesitated. "There is something unclean about it." "Look," Dee insisted, "and tell me what you see." Kelly leaned forward. His breath fogged slightly as it touched the stone. His eyes narrowed. A heartbeat passed. 2. Then his body jolted. Dee lunged forward. "What is it? Speak." Kelly's voice broke into a whisper. "A light, no, not a light. A shape, something behind the blackness. Watching." Dee's heart pounded. "Is it an angel?" "I don't know." Kelly swallowed. "It changes. It knows we are looking." From that moment, the mirror became the center of their world. Their sessions grew longer, stranger. Dee recorded everything. Every word Kelly uttered while staring into the mirror, every symbol he claimed to see, every message he claimed came from beyond. Voices began to speak, soft at first, like breezes brushing against the edge of consciousness. They whispered in languages neither man recognized. Kelly described wings made of shadow and flame. He spoke of beings standing behind veils of darkness, bending space like fabric. Dee scribbled frantically in his journal, believing he was witnessing divine communication. The mirror reacted too. Sometimes the crack glowed faintly. Sometimes the surface rippled like disturbed water. Sometimes both men felt a pressure inside their skulls, as if the mirror were reaching into their minds. They became obsessed. Nights blurred into days. Meals went untouched. Ink-stained manuscripts piled high around them. Kelly grew pale and withdrawn. Dee developed a tremor in his hands. They no longer slept peacefully when they slept at all. Kelly insisted the mirror was dangerous. Dee refused to listen. "This is not danger," Dee whispered fiercely. "This is revelation." But not everything the mirror showed was holy. One night, Kelly screamed during a session. Dee rushed to him, gripping his shoulders, shaking him until the visions loosened their hold. When Kelly finally spoke, his voice cracked. "It showed me the queen dead." Dee froze. Elizabeth was not just his patron. She was England's heart. A prophecy of her death could mean treason or war. Dee begged Kelly to describe what he saw. Kelly refused. The next night, the mirror showed them something else. Flames. Cities buried under smoke. Men marching beneath banners soaked in blood. Dee tried to rationalize it. "Visions of possible futures," he insisted. "Warnings." But Kelly looked at him with hollow eyes. "Or temptations." The mirror fed them more. Symbols that haunted their dreams. Words they could not forget. Faces from other worlds. Echoes of ancient gods. Dee began to question who or what was speaking to them. Were these angels? Or something older? Something that wore the voice of heaven like a borrowed mask? The mirror did not answer. Kelly wanted to stop the sessions. Dee refused. He was so close to unlocking the architecture of the universe. He believed the mirror was a gift, a test, A doorway. Kelly believed it was a trap. Their partnership began to fracture. Kelly accused Dee of worshipping the mirror more than God. Dee accused Kelly of weakening under fear. Their arguments grew violent, desperate, each man clawing for understanding while the mirror watched silently. Then, one night, the mirror showed Dee something he never expected. A lake, a city, a burning temple, a man wearing a feathered crown, a man kneeling as thunder echoed overhead. Dee gasped. Kelly recoiled. Neither of them understood what they were seeing. But the mirror did. It was remembering. The obsidian mirror did not care about time. To it, history was not a line. It was a circle. And the visions of Tenochtitlan were not visions of the past or future. They were echoes, shadows, reflections. The mirror had been shaped by one empire, then carried into another. It had whispered to kings in different languages. It had shown destiny to those desperate to bend it. And now it whispered to Dee, not with images, not with voices, but with a quiet, irresistible pull, a beckoning, as if inviting him to follow it deeper into the darkness. Dee touched the stone one last time. The crack pulsed. Something stirred behind the surface. Something patient. Something ancient. Something that had waited centuries for someone to ask the wrong question. And John Dee no longer knew whether he had been chosen by the mirror or claimed by it. The obsidian mirror did not remain confined to ritual chambers or secretive midnight seances. Once it entered John Dee's possession, it slipped, quietly, almost imperceptibly, into the bloodstream of an empire. Dee himself believed he was merely a scholar seeking truth, a servant of knowledge, but the mirror watched his ascent with the patience of something that understood how power truly functions. England was on the cusp of transformation. The Renaissance had begun to loosen the chains of superstition, yet the medieval world clung fiercely to its ghosts. Science and magic sat side by side on scholars' desks. Astronomers still cast horoscopes. Alchemists worked in the same halls as mathematicians. And at the center of this strange crossroads stood John Dee, advisor to the Queen, visionary to explorers, confidant of spies. He believed the world could be mapped, measured, and mastered. The mirror believed otherwise. It began subtly. At court, Dee's sessions with the mirror fed his growing reputation. He interpreted comets, deciphered portents, and cast the Queen's horoscope. Elizabeth cherished his counsel, not because she trusted magic, but because she trusted him. His intellect was unmatched, his loyalty unimpeachable, but she could not ignore the changes. He spoke more often of angelic commands, of encoded messages hidden in sacred texts, of symbols he claimed did not come from any earthly tongue. He presented maps of continents few had seen, insisting England must reach them before Spain. He whispered of sea routes revealed not by sailors, but by visions. And occasionally, just occasionally, his eyes drifted to the mirror as though awaiting approval. Elizabeth was not easily frightened, but something about the mirror troubled her. When she visited Dee's study and saw it unveiled, she felt a pressure in the air, subtle but real. The torches flickered. The room felt colder. And though she knew it was impossible, she could have sworn the mirror darkened slightly, as if reacting to her presence. She told herself it was imagination, but she did not ask to see it again. Meanwhile, England and Spain drifted ever closer to war. The seas swarmed with privateers, spies, and coded messages. Dee found himself drawn into this shadow realm. He drafted secret reports for the Queen, advising on alliances and threats. He calculated ship trajectories, wind patterns, and celestial cycles that could help England's navy outmaneuver its enemies. But every time he grew uncertain, every time doubt flickered across his mind, he consulted the mirror. He told himself it was logic, but it was dependence. Edward Kelly noticed the shift first. He watched as Dee grew more erratic, more desperate in his search for divine validation. Kelly no longer needed visions to see the danger. He could see it in Dee's trembling hands, his sleepless eyes, the way he touched the mirror's edge like a man touching a relic of salvation. "The mirror is using you," Kelly whispered one night. Dee slammed his book shut. "It is a tool. It is a voice. Kelly countered. And you are listening. But Dee refused to believe that knowledge could corrupt. To him, truth was always worth the risk. He did not understand that the mirror did not offer truth, it offered possibility. And possibility is far more seductive. Word of Dee's strange object spread beyond Mortlake. Scholars wrote letters requesting glimpses. Foreign ambassadors whispered of a dark glass that allowed the English to see beyond the visible world. Spaniards accused Dee of sorcery. Jesuits warned that England had acquired a pagan artifact capable of summoning demons. The more people spoke of it, the more the mirror became myth. An English noble who visited Dee swore that the candlelight dimmed when he passed the mirror. A sailor reported that Dee had predicted a storm weeks before it happened, after staring into the black stone. A spy claimed Dee was using the mirror to track Spanish ships from hundreds of miles away. Each story embellished the last. Every rumor made the mirror stronger. Even Dee began to believe that the mirror could influence the shape of nations. When he advised Elizabeth to expand the Royal Navy, he did so with a conviction that surprised even himself. He argued that England was destined to rule the seas, that a new world awaited their claim, that angels had whispered England's future into his ear. But were they angels? Or echoes? Or the mirror itself, nudging human ambition the way it once nudged emperors and priests? Kelly confronted him again. "You're not receiving visions," he hissed. "You're being shown what it wants you to see." "What it wants?" Dee spat. "It is an object." "No," Kelly whispered, voice cracking. "It is a doorway, and doorways lead somewhere." Their partnership decayed like old parchment. Accusations turned bitter. Kelly grew unstable. Dee grew consumed. The Queen, worried by court whispers, ordered Dee to be more discreet. Some believed he was losing his mind. Others believed he was becoming something more. One night, after Kelly stormed out in anger, Dee sat alone before the mirror. The rain pounded against the window. The wind howled like a wounded animal. The candles guttered, their flames trembling. He stared into the obsidian. Slowly, the blackness stirred. Images blossomed like frost patterns. Ships on stormy seas, banners snapping in the wind, cannons firing, men praying in terror as waves rose higher than masts. He saw London in flames. He saw Spanish galleons sinking. He saw crowns toppling. He saw empires expanding. He saw possibilities layered upon possibilities, like reflections inside reflections. He leaned closer. The mirror pulsed. A single whispered phrase formed in his mind. Not heard, not spoken, but felt. "Shape it." He straightened, heart thundering. "Shape it. Not witness it. Not predict it. Shape it." The mirror was not a window. It was an invitation. And for a moment, Dee understood exactly what Moctezuma had felt centuries earlier. The dizzying thrill of standing at the edge of destiny, believing one could guide the storm instead of being struck by it. But as quickly as the thought came, fear followed. He pulled back, breath trembling. He realized he had crossed a line. The mirror was no longer a tool. It was a partner, tempter, a whisperer. He covered it with black cloth. For the first time since acquiring it, he locked the study door and walked away without looking back. Kelly left England soon after. Dee never fully recovered his reputation. But their visions, their writings, their whispered revelations had already seeped into the consciousness of a rising empire. Explorers carried Dee's maps across oceans. Spies carried his codes through enemy borders. Sailors carried his prophecies into battle. And the mirror waited quietly in Mortlake. Silent, patient, satisfied that it had pushed yet another empire into believing in destiny. For mirrors do not show truth. They show belief. And belief, in the hands of kings and conquerors, is the most dangerous force on earth. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, of wrapping even the strangest events in the gentle cloth of forgetfulness. Empires fall, wars end, names fade from books. But certain objects, certain stories do not disappear so easily. They sink instead, slowly, into the dark silt of history, waiting for someone curious or desperate or foolish enough to dig them up again. The obsidian mirror was one of those objects. After John Dee's death, his estate became a puzzle of debts, manuscripts, scattered instruments, and rumors. Some said he died a disappointed man, convinced that he had failed to complete the great work the angels had given him. Others said he went to his grave satisfied, believing he had glimpsed the architecture of heaven. Few agreed on what became of his tools, but fragments of the truth survived in letters and ledgers. There were mentions of a black stone of foreign make, of a speculum, used for angelic communications, of the Aztec glass. Some claimed the church wanted it destroyed. Others whispered that secret societies took interest in it. Still others said Dee himself had hidden it in a place where no one would find it until the world was ready. The reality was less dramatic, but no less mysterious. After Dee's household broke apart, the mirror passed quietly from one set of hands to another. A curious antiquarian acquired it along with several of Dee's crystal balls and charts, recognizing the object not as an idle trinket but as a relic of one of England's most infamous magicians. He placed it among other oddities: alchemical furnaces, strange manuscripts, anatomical models. Visitors stared at it, uneasy. Some remarked how it seemed so dark that it made the rest of the room brighter by contrast. Others swore the crack across its surface looked different every time they saw it, as if it subtly shifted when no one watched. A few laughed nervously and called it a stage prop, a remnant of old superstition, but those who spent too much time in front of it never laughed for long. One collector in the early 1700s insisted that the mirror interfered with his sleep. He claimed it gave him unhealthy dreams: cities collapsing, foreign temples, faces masked in feathers and gold. He tried moving it from room to room, but the dreams followed. Eventually he wrapped it in cloth and shoved it into a locked chest behind stacks of less troublesome relics. There it lay for decades, sleeping. The world outside changed. Empires shifted. Science rose with sharper teeth. The language of angels gave way to the language of mathematics and physics. Men who once would have been called magicians were now called philosophers or naturalists. The old fear of black mirrors and enchanted stones faded beneath the glow of enlightenment. And yet, in the background, there lingered a fascination with what had been lost. The 19th century came, bringing with it a strange revival of interest in all things arcane. While factories roared and cities expanded, parlors flickered with candlelight as people once again gathered around tables to summon spirits, read fortunes, and question the dead. Spiritualism crept in through the cracks of industrial progress. Seances became fashionable. Ghost stories sold out printing presses. Mediums offered comfort to those mourning in a world increasingly ruled by machines. Amid this cultural hunger for the unseen, curators and collectors began looking backward, toward forgotten artifacts, occult tools, and relics of an older, stranger time. One such curator, studying an inherited collection of oddities from a decayed country estate, opened a cracked old chest one rain-soaked afternoon. Inside he found bundles of scrolls, broken instruments, and a cloth-wrapped disc heavier than it should have been. When he unwrapped it, he froze. The mirror gazed back, dark, cracked, waiting. He did not know its full story. He did not know about Teotihuacan, or Moctezuma, or John Dee's midnight experiments. But he knew enough to feel uneasy. This was not just glass, not just stone. It had a presence. He turned it over in his hands, noticing the weight, the smoothness, the subtle irregularities along the edges where it had once been mounted. He made a note in his catalog: black mirror, volcanic glass, possibly of American origin, formerly belonging to Dr. D. It joined other artifacts destined for preservation. Soon afterward, the mirror found its way into the growing collections of a public institution in London, a place dedicated to gathering the world's history under a single roof, a place where pharaohs slept beside Roman generals, where carved idols from forgotten islands stared down at rows of visitors from behind glass cases. There, among tablets and statues and jewelry, the mirror took its place. It was given a label, a number, a category. To the museum staff, it was primarily a curiosity. A scrying mirror, said to have belonged to the astrologer John Dee, possibly carved from obsidian sourced from the New World. an object from the strange borderlands between science and superstition, between religion and experiment. But labels cannot capture presence. Visitors approached the mirror out of idle interest and left with a faint unease they couldn't explain. Children pressed their faces close to the glass, trying to see themselves in its black surface, only to step back, frowning. It did not behave like a normal reflective object. It seemed to swallow their features and offer only hints of shadow. Couples took photographs, but often moved on quickly, rubbing their arms as if chilled. A few people lingered longer. Occult enthusiasts, drawn by Dee's name, stared into the mirror with the reverence of pilgrims. Some swore they saw shapes in its depths. A flicker of movement, a shadow that did not match the room around it, a suggestion of firelight where no flame burned. Scholars were more cautious. They examined it under measured light, recording its dimensions, composition, and provenance. Was it truly from Mexico? Did its volcanic signature match obsidian from known Aztec or earlier mines? Was its association with D a later embellishment or a genuine link? Opinions differed. One historian argued it must have been fashioned in Europe, inspired by travel accounts of strange American glass. Another insisted it bore the unmistakable hallmarks of pre-Columbian craftsmanship. Still others pointed to the crack as evidence of rough handling, not ritual use. The arguments ranged across articles, catalogs, lectures. Footnotes battled footnotes. Scientific instruments probed the stone. Spectrographic analysis, microscopic examination, comparative studies with other obsidian artifacts. The mirror endured all of it, silent. It did not care which century scholars examined it. It did not care what label sat beneath its display. It had looked into emperors and magicians. It had watched empires rise and fall. Now it watched tourists with cameras and guidebooks, museum guards checking their watches, school children yawning between exhibits. On paper, its story became a tidy narrative. An Aztec mirror, brought to Europe as plunder, later owned by John Dee, now preserved as a relic of history and superstition. But even within that tidy narrative, there was doubt. Some experts pointed to inconsistencies in its trail of ownership. Others noted that more than one obsidian mirror was claimed to be Dee's. Which one, if any, was truly the mirror he used? Could multiple mirrors have shared the same myth? Or was there only one whose shadow stretched through all these accounts? A single object wearing many stories like layers of clothing? The debate only deepened its aura. Most visitors saw only a strange black disk in a glass case. A few saw more than that, and somewhere, in the quiet moments after closing time, when the lights dimmed and the halls of the museum stood empty, the mirror sat in the dark, reflecting nothing, or perhaps reflecting everything it had ever seen. The crack across its surface remained, like a scar, like a memory, like a doorway still waiting to be opened. And though the world around it changed, candles to gas lamps to electric bulbs, the mirror remained what it had always been, a question. One that no amount of cataloging could fully answer. One that would soon draw scientists, skeptics, and believers into new arguments, new investigations, and new attempts to explain what, exactly, this piece of black stone really was. A relic of an empire? A magician's tool? Or something far older, that had only ever been pretending to be a mirror? The British Museum stands like a fortress of memory, its marble columns holding centuries of stories, its halls echoing with footsteps from every corner of the world. Visitors enter expecting to see relics illuminated beneath steady white lights, each one fixed neatly behind glass, labeled, categorized, understood. But some objects resist understanding. Some objects hum beneath the surface of history with a presence that scholars can't quantify and visitors can't verbalize. The obsidian mirror was one of those objects. It rested quietly inside a glass case in the Enlightenment Gallery, surrounded by other relics of early science. Astrolabes, telescopes, alchemical instruments, fossils once mistaken for dragons. It seemed almost ordinary among them, just a disk of black volcanic glass no larger than a dinner plate. Many walked past without a second glance. But those who stopped, those who lingered, felt something. A a faint pressure behind the eyes, a coolness on the skin, a sense that the mirror was not merely absorbing light but absorbing attention, memory, intention, as if its darkness were a mouth, slowly inhaling the room. The museum label beneath it read, Obsidian Mirror, attributed to John D. Mexico, 15th to 16th century. A simple description for an object with an impossibly tangled past. In the 1990s, the mirror began drawing the attention of researchers again. Not occultists, not mystics, but scientists armed with new tools. They wanted to trace its origin with precision. They wanted to answer one question. Was this truly the mirror of John D? And if so, where had it been born? Volcanologists joined the inquiry. They shaved microscopic dust from the mirror's edge. Too little to harm it, enough to reveal its chemical fingerprints. Obsidian is like DNA. Each volcano produces its own signature, its own unique blend of minerals. By reading those signatures, scientists can trace a mirror's birthplace with almost uncanny accuracy. Most assumed the mirror came from the Aztec Empire, likely from mines around Pachuca or Ucario, famous for their obsidian deposits. It made sense. The Spanish took thousands of artifacts from Mexico. D's mirror must have been among them. But the results stunned everyone. The obsidian did not come from the Aztec heartland. This fingerprint matched something older, something from the highlands near Teotihuacan, the city of mirrors, the city whose artisans perfected obsidian long before the Mexica ever stood on the shores of Lake Texcoco, the city whose rituals centered on reflection, shadow, transformation, the city whose craftsmen carved mirrors not as objects but as instruments, gateways, offerings. The discovery didn't just shift academic opinion. It rewrote the mirror's biography. Suddenly, it wasn't merely an Aztec artifact. It was a survivor of a city that had fallen 1,000 years earlier. How had it endured? How had it been preserved? Who had carried it across centuries of upheaval? The answers dissolved into speculation, arguments, theories. The museum, once confident in its labeling, found itself trembling at the edges of uncertainty. Then came the next surprise. Under scanning electron microscopes, researchers found faint residues inside tiny scratches on the mirror's surface. Organic particles, traces of oils, pollen, something else, something older than expected. Ritual residue. The kind that clings to an object handled repeatedly in ceremonies involving smoke, flowers, fire, and blood. Layers of residue, not one. The mirror had been used. Not once. Not sporadically. Repeatedly. Intensely. Its surface bore the microabrasions of ancient polishing methods not practiced in later centuries. A pattern unique to the master craftsmen of Teotihuacan. Tiny swirling arcs where stone and water had shaped darkness into a perfect disk. It was not a mirror created for trade or decoration. It was a mirror created for purpose. As scientists published their findings, historians bristled. They debated age, ownership, journey. But something stranger came next, something that science alone could not explain. A museum curator, during a routine early morning inspection, paused in front of the mirror. The lights were dim, the gallery silent. She stood alone, sipping her tea, watching the faint glow of dawn bleed through the windows. And then she saw it. The mirror brightened. Not visibly, not enough to illuminate the room, but enough for her to feel the light. A dull inner pulse. She blinked, leaned closer, wondering if a reflection from a window or passing car had touched the glass. Nothing had. The surface remained matte black, yet something inside it flickered. She stepped back, heart thudding. The sensation lasted no more than a second. But it was enough. She logged the experience in her report, carefully worded, professionally detached. Others saw things too. A guard swore that sometimes the mirror seemed closer to the edge of its display mount than before, as though it had shifted slightly. A historian working late on catalog revisions reported hearing a faint tapping, like fingernails against glass, while alone in the gallery. Another researcher described feeling watched whenever he examined the mirror's crack under magnification. The museum dismissed such accounts as exhaustion, imagination, stress. But the mirror remained unbothered. It had listened to emperors whisper questions of fate. It had endured rituals that blurred the boundary between life and visions. It had shown John Dee the architecture of fear dressed as revelation. Now it listened to the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the chatter of tourists. But behind the glass case, behind the modern calm, something ancient lingered. During one exhibition, when the mirror was moved from its usual gallery into a room with controlled lighting, the technicians noticed something on the back of the disc. Faint etching, undecipherable, worn by centuries, a pattern that resembled not writing but geometry, a kind of diagram used in Teotihuacan cosmology. A symbol of portals, pathways, reflections, a map, or a warning. Experts photographed it, debated it, dismissed it as coincidence. But one young researcher refused to dismiss it. She traced it onto paper, compared it to carvings found in Teotihuacan's underworld tunnels. The lines matched too neatly to ignore. It was as if the mirror was not simply made by Teotihuacan artisans. It was made for Teotihuacan purposes. Purposes the Spaniards never understood. Purposes John Dee never recognized. Purposes the museum could not explain. The deeper researchers looked, the more the mirror contradicted them. It was Aztec yet pre-Aztec. It was polished yet cracked. It was a ceremonial tool yet a mathematical device. It was a mirror that did not reflect. A surface that swallowed light, swallowed questions, swallowed certainty. Visitors continued to pass by it, snapping photos, whispering, moving on to the next exhibit. But the mirror did not care about their fascination. It cared only for the eyes that lingered too long, the minds that wondered too deeply, the ones, perhaps, who gazed into it not as tourists but as seekers. And late at night, after the gallery lights dimmed, some swore that the mirror seemed to breathe. A slow, steady pulse in the darkness, as if remembering, as if waiting, as if preparing to reveal something to the next person brave or foolish enough to look long enough for it to look back. Modern science prides itself on one thing above all: the ability to explain, to measure, to categorize, to drain mystery from the unknown until only data remains. So when the Obsidian mirror at the British Museum began attracting attention from researchers, skeptics approached it with quiet confidence. Surely, whatever strange stories clung to it were nothing more than historical embellishment. A cracked disk of volcanic glass could not hold secrets, could not influence minds, could not reflect anything except superstition. Yet the deeper they studied it, the more it resisted. The first line of inquiry was psychological. Scholars argued that the mirror's darkness triggered a natural cognitive phenomenon known as pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find shapes in shadow. A mind hungry for meaning will invent it, they said. A priest staring into the mirror for hours during ancient rituals would inevitably see visions. A magician like John Dee, already primed to believe in angelic communication, would project his desires into the glass. Even Moctezuma, burdened by prophecy and omens, could have imagined the strangers long before they arrived. Case closed. Except it wasn't, because when psychologists conducted controlled experiments, inviting volunteers to sit alone with the mirror in dim light for extended periods, something unexpected happened. Even those who entered skeptically reported peculiar sensations. A pressure in the temples, a metallic taste on the tongue, a sudden tightening in the throat. A few described seeing brief distortions, ripples in the darkness, flashes of movement. One participant, a physicist known for her rigid rationality, ended her session after only 2 minutes. She refused to explain why, simply saying, "I thought I saw myself blink from inside the mirror." The researchers chalked it up to suggestion, yet none volunteered to repeat the experiment. Next came the optical experts. They analyzed the curvature of the mirror, seeking flaws that could explain its behavior. They found nothing out of the ordinary. No warping, no trick reflections, no hidden layers. Obsidian absorbs up to 98% of visible light, enough to make even a flawless surface feel like a void. That was their explanation. But if it was merely absorbing light, why did some observers insist the surface looked deeper than it should? As if it had depth, real physical depth, where none could exist. This intrigued a team of physicists, who proposed that the mirror's reflective angle might manipulate contrast in ways that mimic dimensionality. They conducted tests shining lasers across the surface. Their notes recorded consistent disruptions in the beam, tiny fluctuations, as if the obsidian were not uniformly dense. One scientist wrote in the margins, "It's almost like the stone inhales the beam, not reflects it. But stones don't inhale." So the note remained unofficial. Archaeologists turned to context. They argued that mirrors like these were common in Mesoamerican ritual practices. Many were symbolic tools, meant to channel the authority of the gods. When priests gazed into them, they were not seeing literal visions. They were entering a psychological state shaped by ritual, incense, rhythmic drumming, and fervent belief. The mirror was simply a focal point. Rational, reasonable. Except, none of the other obsidian mirrors recovered from temples, tombs, or workshops behaved quite like this one. None produced the same persistent accounts of watching. None drew such emotional reactions. None created a sensation of being pulled inward. So archaeologists offered an alternative explanation. Perhaps it was cultural projection. Europeans, unaware of the cultural significance of obsidian, had exaggerated its properties. The mirror's mystique grew with each retelling, from conquistadors to Victorian occultists. By the time modern observers encountered it, they were primed to feel something eerie. But there was one final group whose voices complicated everything: indigenous scholars. Their perspective was not scientific, nor skeptical. It was ancestral. To them, obsidian is not dead volcanic glass. It is a living boundary, a membrane between worlds, a stone formed from fire but cooled into darkness, holding within it the memory of both. They explained that mirrors were never meant to reflect the physical world. They were meant to reveal the unseen, intentions, spirits, shadows, possibilities. The mirror did not show the future. It showed the forces shaping the future. When asked whether visions were hallucinations or supernatural events, an elder simply smiled. "To us, there is no difference." One indigenous historian, after examining the British Museum mirror, refused to look into it a second time. "The mirror is not dangerous," she said softly, "but it makes you dangerous to yourself." Her comment unnerved even the skeptics. Some modern spiritual practitioners approached the mirror with reverence. They felt drawn to its surface, as though recognizing it from dreams or ancestral memory. A few claimed the mirror radiated energy, subtle, vibrating like heat rising from stone after sunset. Scientists dismissed such claims as subjective, but they could not dismiss the recordings. The museum had recently installed ultra-sensitive environmental sensors throughout its galleries. These devices monitored temperature, humidity, air pressure, and electromagnetic fluctuations. Most artifacts registered nothing unusual. The mirror did. Not constantly, not dramatically, but regularly. Small shifts, anomalies in air ionization, a faint electromagnetic signature that pulsed irregularly, never aligning with nearby electronics. Engineers blamed faulty wiring. Technicians blamed equipment malfunction. They replaced the sensors twice. The readings persisted. It was not enough to declare anything supernatural, but it was enough to keep the mirror under quiet observation. Despite all the studies, all the debates, one truth remained. The mirror defied explanation because the mirror belonged to no single category. It was part artifact, part instrument, part myth, part psychological trigger, part scientific anomaly. A thing that should not exist as it is and yet does. Late at night, after the museum has emptied, security cameras occasionally capture small flickers of movement near the exhibit. Not full shapes, just distortions like heat waves in winter air. Guards review the footage and shrug. Perhaps a reflection. Perhaps dust. Perhaps nothing. But the mirror remains exactly where it has always been. Silent. Still. Watching. And whether the watchers believe in visions or not, the mirror does not care. Because every eye that lingers too long becomes part of its story. And the story is nowhere near finished. Not far from the ruins of ancient Teotihuacan, beyond the tourist paths, beyond the souvenir stalls, beyond the voices that echo across the Sun Pyramid, There are workshops that have existed in one form or another for over 1,000 years. Here, master artisans carve obsidian the way their ancestors once did. Slowly, methodically, as though they are shaping the night itself. Most modern visitors come seeking jewelry, blades, or trinkets. But a small number come seeking something stranger. They want mirrors. True obsidian mirrors. The kind no machine can cut, no modern factory can replicate. The kind that require patience, devotion, and a steady hand guided by instinct older than recorded history. The artisans do not advertise these mirrors. They do not display them. They only make them for those who ask with the right voice, soft, respectful, almost reverent. It is not written anywhere, but it is understood. Obsidian mirrors choose their owners, not the other way around. Among these artisans is an old man named Aurelio, whose family has worked with obsidian for generations. His workshop sits in the shadow of a hill scarred by ancient quarries. Inside, the air smells of volcanic dust and polished stone. The walls are lined with blades so sharp they could split a hair, statues that catch the light like liquid darkness, and raw obsidian chunks shimmering with hidden galaxies. Aurelio does not look like a man who crafts portals. He looks like a farmer, lean, weathered, quiet. But when he touches obsidian, something shifts in the room. When the stone sings, he says, "I follow." His hands glide over the slabs with surprising delicacy. He taps each one with his knuckle, listening for tones. Some stones ring clear, some ring dull, some refuse to ring at all, and those, he says, are the ones you never touch. He keeps a stack of near-perfect discs wrapped in cloth in the corner. These are the mirrors he slowly polishes over weeks, sometimes months. The polishing process is meditative. Grinding with sand, then with ash, then with water, repeating until the surface turns impossibly smooth. He never rushes. When the mirror is ready, he murmurs, "It tells me." But something strange happens in the workshop, something even Aurelio refuses to explain. People who watch the polishing process swear the mirror grows darker over time, not brighter. Instead of becoming more reflective, it becomes less, absorbing light instead of bouncing it back. Some artisans joke that obsidian has a hunger, but the laughter fades quickly when they speak of certain mirrors refusing to show a reflection even when completed. Aurelio refuses to sell those. He hides them. One artisan, Aurelio's nephew, once tried to replicate an ancient technique he found described in an archaeological journal. It involved heating obsidian until it glowed, then cooling it under moonlight before beginning the polishing phase. He attempted it once late at night working alone. He quit the next day. When asked why, he only shook his head. "It changed while I was working," he whispered. The crack in the stone moved. He refused to elaborate. There are stories among the artisans of mirrors awakening, of surfaces rippling like disturbed water, of shadows appearing behind one's reflection and vanishing when blinked at. Most brush these tales aside as superstition, but not all. One woman, Marisol, a young obsidian worker whose skill rivaled the elders, refused to carve mirrors entirely. She only worked on jewelry. When pressed, she finally confessed that during her apprenticeship, she had polished a mirror for 4 days straight until she saw something she could not explain. "I saw myself," she told Aurelio quietly, "but older," and she was crying. Aurelio nodded, as if this were not unusual. He took the mirror from her and buried it deep in the hillside quarry at dusk. "Some mirrors do not want to be born," he said. As modern interest in ancient obsidian techniques grew, researchers visited the workshops, eager to observe these artisans at work. They brought cameras, measuring tools, laptops. They questioned everything, the sound tests, the timing, the polishing rituals. They recorded hours of footage. Yet when they later reviewed the videos, the obsidian mirrors appeared strangely flat, almost like black holes on the screen. No reflections, no depth, no light. The researchers shrugged it off as technical error. But some noticed something unsettling. The areas around the mirrors seemed slightly darker in the footage, as though shadows leaned toward them. A subtle vignette, a creeping dimness. Cameras can glitch. Shadows can deceive. But when the same phenomenon appeared across 3 separate cameras, from 3 separate teams, the researchers fell silent. They continued their studies, but they stopped asking certain questions. Meanwhile, the artisans kept carving. One day, a historian asked Aurelio why he continued crafting mirrors when he clearly understood their dangers. He paused for a long moment, then spoke as though reciting something he had been taught as a boy. Obsidian was made by the earth in anger, he said. Fire trapped in stone. When you polish it, you are revealing its memory. Memory of what? The historian asked. Aurelio looked toward the mountains where Teotihuacan once ruled. Of everything it ever saw, he said. The historian laughed nervously, but Aurelio's expression didn't change. Another artisan, younger and more talkative, explained the belief more gently. Our ancestors used mirrors to see what the world hides, he said. Not the future, not the past, just the truth beneath the surface. If the truth frightened them, they blamed the mirror. Were the mirrors dangerous? The historian asked. The artisan shrugged. Only if you ask them questions you shouldn't. When pressed for examples, he refused to give any. Yet there were whispers, always whispers. A tourist who claimed that during a demonstration, he saw the surface of a mirror blink. A photographer whose equipment malfunctioned every time he tried to capture the polishing process. A collector who bought a mirror and returned it 3 days later, pale and trembling. The artisans accepted all of it with calm resignation. Some stones, they said, should never be mirrors. Some mirrors should never be used. And some, only a few, carry something inside them that no hand, no ritual, no label can fully contain. As twilight settles over the workshops each evening, the mirrors wrapped in cloth seem to darken the corners where they rest. Visitors swear they can feel a subtle hum in the air, a vibration just at the edge of perception. Aurelio simply closes his doors and lights a single candle, letting its glow flicker across the unfinished stones. He knows what the researchers do not, what the ancestors understood, what Moctezuma learned too late, what John Dee feared just in time. A mirror is not merely an object. It is a threshold, and thresholds are meant to be crossed carefully, because when you stare into obsidian long enough, something on the other side eventually stares back. The modern world likes to believe it has outgrown superstition. Cities glow with electric light. Satellites watch the sky. Algorithms predict human behavior with unsettling accuracy. There is no room, we tell ourselves, for ghosts or gods or whispers from obsidian mirrors. Yet the mirror's legend, like the mirror itself, refused to stay buried. It began quietly with a photograph. A tourist visiting the British Museum snapped a picture of the obsidian mirror from an angle that captured half her face. When she uploaded it to social media, she received an unexpected message from a stranger. "Who is that behind you?" Confused, she zoomed in. The reflection did not match the room. There was no one standing behind her at the exhibit. Yet in the mirror's dark surface, a shadowy outline loomed. A shape taller than a person, angular, almost skeletal. She assumed it was a camera artifact, a glitch, but every filter she applied only sharpened the outline. She deleted the photo within minutes. Others were not so quick to erase what they found. Over the course of several months, dozens of online posts surfaced, each from different visitors using different devices from different angles. Some images showed faint distortions. Others revealed blurred silhouettes. One captured a handprint pressed against the inside of the obsidian surface. Experts dismissed all of it. Pareidolia, light interference, reflections of other visitors the photographer simply didn't notice. But the anomalies kept coming. A museum employee created an anonymous forum account to share her experience. She described hearing murmurs near the mirror during closing shifts, whispers that sounded like distant echoes bouncing off stone. Another guard reported that his walkie-talkie crackled when he passed the exhibit, emitting bursts of static that formed patterns too rhythmic to be random. A group of paranormal investigators gained permission to film overnight in the Enlightenment Gallery. Their footage, released online months later, contained nothing dramatic, no apparitions, no movement. But the audio track hid a subtle anomaly. When enhanced, A faint, irregular tapping could be heard near the mirror. A tapping only captured when the room was empty. Meanwhile, indigenous activists spoke out against the object's presence in the museum at all. "You cannot place a portal in a glass box and expect it to behave," one said softly during an interview. "It remembers what it is." Their warnings were largely ignored. Academics grew increasingly hostile toward paranormal interpretations. They held public talks refuting the myths, reminding audiences that obsidian is non-reflective by nature, that lighting conditions could create illusions, that human perception is notoriously unreliable. But there was a problem. Not all witnesses were ordinary visitors. A physicist from MIT, touring London for a conference, visited the museum during a free afternoon. She later admitted, anonymously, that while standing before the mirror she felt a sudden, sharp pressure behind her eyes, as if someone had placed their fingers on her temples and pushed. A neurologist from Berlin fainted after staring too long into the surface. He claimed he saw a corridor of light stretching inside the stone. A computer scientist attempted to scan the mirror with a portable infrared device. The reading registered an anomaly, a small but significant cold zone at the mirror's core, colder than any other object in the gallery. Temperature inconsistencies can happen, but only when objects are actively cooling. The mirror had sat in a climate-controlled room for years. Researchers rechecked their devices. They blamed faulty calibration. But when the museum quietly performed a full thermal imaging scan of the gallery, the report noted a faint temperature gradient emanating from the mirror's crack, like a draft from a doorway left slightly ajar. The museum sealed the report, but rumors leaked. And with every rumor, the mirror's myth grew stronger. Online communities began piecing together timelines: the Spanish conquest, John Dee sessions, Victorian seances, modern anomalies. The mirror became a nexus in conspiracy forums, claimed to be everything from a quantum portal to a cursed artifact to a fragment of meteorite. Most theories were extreme. Many contradicted one another. But one idea appeared again and again. The mirror does not reflect the viewer. It reflects whatever watches the viewer. Videos surfaced of people holding up their phones at the exhibit. Some showed nothing unusual. Some showed the screen flicker briefly as the device passed in front of the mirror. A few showed something else entirely: an elongated distortion, a ripple like heat haze moving across the surface. These distortions never matched the environment. Even skeptics were unsettled. Meanwhile, artisans in Mexico began reporting dreams. Not nightmares, dreams. Of ancient chambers. Of glowing mercury pools. Of priests staring into obsidian. Of serpents carved in stone. The artisans insisted they were simply tapping into ancestral memory. But one detail stood out. Many dreamed of a cracked mirror. A mirror they did not carve. A mirror they could describe in perfect detail. News networks eventually caught wind of the growing obsession. A handful of journalists published skeptical articles mocking mirror fever and warning against superstition. But the ridicule did nothing to stop the flow of testimonies. One article mentioned something curious. The museum had quietly increased its security around the exhibit, not to protect it from theft, but from certain visitors who attempted to place offerings near the mirror. Flowers, obsidian shards, feathers, gold-painted stones, as if reconnecting it to rituals forgotten by time. Even more unsettling were the attempts by modern occult groups to use the mirror as Dee once had. They smuggled candles into the gallery, whispered invocations under their breath, recorded audio in hopes of catching voices. A few claimed success. One recording made its way onto the internet. The audio begins with a soft hum, likely the gallery's air filtration system. Then, faintly, a whisper emerges. Not in English, not in Spanish, not in Nahuatl. A fragment of a language not easily categorized. Linguists dismissed it as noise overlap. But some indigenous scholars shivered. They recognized the cadence, not the words, but the rhythm. It resembled a chant used in Teotihuacan's mirror rituals. A chant meant to open a path. At the British Museum, the mirror continued to sit in its case. Silent, motionless, black as a collapsed star. But something had changed. It was no longer forgotten. It was no longer sleeping. The modern world had rediscovered it. And whether through science, superstition, curiosity, or obsession, people stared into it long enough for the mirror to stir. After centuries of quiet patience, someone had finally begun looking back. The mirror's shift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a sound below hearing or a shadow just outside sight. At first, the museum blamed everything on coincidence. A visitor fainting, a guard feeling watched, a researcher waking at 3:33 every night with no dream to explain the panic in her chest. Coincidence was comfortable. Coincidence kept things normal. But coincidences began to gather. A photography student noticed half his mirror photos were corrupted, pixelated into sharp geometric patterns resembling ancient glyphs. A physicist felt a sudden pressure tighten around her temples when standing too close to the case, as if something behind the glass was focusing on me. An electrician swore he heard footsteps behind him during a blackout. The cameras showed nothing, except one frame where the gallery lights flickered and a tall, shimmering silhouette appeared for an instant. The museum deleted the footage, but the guard never walked that corridor again. Visitors kept coming, drawn by rumors. Some felt a chill. Some felt warmth. A few claimed to hear a whisper. Not words, but breath. Children cried without knowing why. Skeptics scoffed until they found themselves staring longer than intended, caught by the gravity of the darkness. To calm the situation, the museum moved the mirror to a controlled archive room. No tourists, no cameras, only silent observation. Yet the archivists grew uneasy. One said the mirror looked darker than before. Another swore the crack seemed wider. A third claimed that at a certain angle he didn't see the archive room behind him, he saw mountains. Mountains he had never visited. Mountains from Mexico. He dreamed of tunnels beneath pyramids that night. Dreams so vivid he woke shaking. That was when researchers began whispering the thought no one dared say aloud. What if the mirror wasn't reacting to superstition? What if it was reacting to attention? As if, after centuries of silence, it finally realized the world was watching again. The mirror no longer felt like an artifact, it felt like a witness. Not alive, not conscious, yet undeniably aware. Those who studied it, even skeptics, sensed a quiet intelligence resting beneath its polished darkness. It had outlived empires, kings, priests, scholars, and corporations, yet remained unchanged. Humanity changed. The mirror simply watched. Researchers began circling around a new idea. Perhaps the mirror didn't show visions at all. Perhaps it only revealed what the viewer carried inside. Moctezuma saw his fears. Dee saw his angels. Modern tourists saw their own shadows. The obsidian surface absorbed no reflection, only emotion. But there was something troubling. Some visions were shared. People with no knowledge of ancient rituals described identical tunnels, identical glyphs, identical echoes. How could multiple minds imagine the same thing? Unless the mirror was holding something, memories, fragments, impressions left by the countless people who once gazed into it. Like sediment at the bottom of a deep well. The mirror wasn't magical. It was historical, collecting human thoughts the way stone collects heat. In that sense, the mirror reflected not individuals but humanity. Yet even as this theory gained acceptance, the mirror betrayed its neutrality. One museum custodian swore he saw a corridor of golden light inside the surface, stretching far beyond the stone, like the entrance to an ancient chamber. His reflection disappeared entirely. No projection, no hallucination. A doorway. And in that moment, the custodian felt something waiting beyond it. Curious, patient, familiar. He resigned the next day. For the first time, the mirror had offered not memory, but invitation. The growing theory was simple but unsettling. The mirror reflected human consciousness. It showed whatever the viewer feared, desired, or refused to confront. In ancient times, obsidian mirrors were tools of introspection, not to see gods but to see truth. But the modern world, drowning in noise and screens, was no longer comfortable with silence. When people stared into the obsidian, the stillness felt like falling into a well. And inside that well, something waited, something shaped not by magic, but by the collective weight of human memory. Scholars suggested that centuries of ritual use had charged the mirror with psychological residue. Each gaze left a fingerprint. Each ritual, each fear, each hope, layer upon layer, created a reservoir of impressions. When a new observer approached, the mirror returned echoes of everyone who came before. That explained the shared visions. That explained the ancient tunnels seen by modern eyes. But then a new problem emerged. If the mirror held centuries of memory, then what happened when billions of people began focusing on it at once? Through photos, videos, debates, theories, human attention became a river flowing directly into the obsidian. The mirror fed on it. Not hunger, just function. And the world's collective curiosity awakened something dormant. Something shaped by memory but not limited to it. A presence formed not from magic, but from humanity's own reflection. Then the curator saw the face. Not hers, not human, not fully formed, just the outline of awareness, staring from within the crack, glowing for a heartbeat, vanishing instantly. Her breath caught. The mirror was no longer reflecting. It was responding. By the final weeks, the mirror had changed the museum. Staff avoided its gallery. Visitors lingered too long. No one could explain why the artifact felt heavier, not physically, but emotionally, as though its darkness carried weight. Researchers concluded that the mirror's power came from us. Our attention, our fear, our obsession. It showed us the parts of ourselves we bury, regret, desire, memory. It was not supernatural. It was psychological. A perfect machine for human reflection. But then the mirror began offering something psychology couldn't explain. Not visions, not illusions, presence. People sensed it before they saw it. A subtle pressure in the air, like standing at the edge of an unlit tunnel. A silence that felt expectant. A shadow that wasn't quite theirs. The museum decided to move the mirror into storage, but before the transfer, a final incident occurred. Early one morning, a curator approached the display. She paused, watching the obsidian surface. It did not reflect her face. Instead, the darkness seemed deeper, layered, shifting, breathing. Then, just for a second, the crack in the mirror glowed with faint amber light. A face appeared inside, not threatening, not comforting, simply aware. It watched her with quiet curiosity, the way a dream watches the dreamer. She stepped back, heart pounding. The glow faded. Her reflection returned. But she knew with absolute certainty that she had not imagined it. The mirror had crossed from memory into intention. It was no longer showing echoes. It was looking back. And the final haunting thought remained. What if the mirror was never meant to reveal history? What if it was meant to reveal us?